How's it going, everyone? Data here, and welcome to the ultimate guide for everything franchise mode on NHL 24. In this video, I will be bringing you through quite literally everything that franchise mode has to offer. From every screen to every possible setting, I'll be guiding you through how to navigate each one, as well as providing my own tips and tricks that I've picked up from playing franchise mode, even BGM mode, dynasty mode in the NHL series for what's now been like a decade and a half, which is crazy to think. So if you came to this video with a particular question about franchise mode in mind, or if you're just a player who wants to hear more about how the mode works or what my personal recommendations might be, I welcome you to sit back and relax as I go through every aspect of franchise mode one by one, or please feel free to use the timestamps down below to go straight to the area that you want to learn more about. This is my third annual franchise mode guide video, and they always perform very well. They're very successful videos on the channel. So I think it goes to show how many people love franchise mode, but also how many people have questions on aspects of the mode that aren't really explained. So I hope that this video will be helpful for you in that regard. If it so happens that your question was not answered in this video, please go ahead and leave a comment here on YouTube or go over to our Discord server. The link for that is in the description. We have a fantastic community here on the channel that has just surpassed 7,000 subscribers, and our Discord server has over 500 active members who love franchise mode and would love to offer their help to you. So I promise that we will do our best to get you an answer as soon as possible if whatever you're looking for is not answered in this video. And hey, if you would like to join that community itself, I am 100% confident that it would be that much greater with you as a part of it. So please do consider subscribing and joining the channel, because speaking of the channel, we do our own franchise mode series. We do player career simulations and much more. So if you enjoy franchise mode, be sure to join in so that you'll be able to enjoy the rest of the content that we have on the channel. So with all that being said, let's start diving into this guide and getting into franchise mode on NHL 24. So first and foremost, before you can even begin your franchise mode save file, before you go click on new for a franchise mode, you need to decide which roster you're going to use, and you have a few options. So before starting your franchise mode on the main screen of NHL 24, you'll want to scroll over to the More tab and go to Rosters. Click on Rosters and click on Active Roster. From there, you'll be brought to this screen where you can decide what you want your roster to be. Now, as I'm creating this video, the most recent EA roster, as you see on the left of your screen, official EA Sports rosters, comes from November 8th. So all the transactions and all the contract extensions, everything that's happened in the National Hockey League up to November 8th would be included in this roster. Now it's a week or two after that, so if anything changed since then, it wouldn't be applied, but November 8th would be a good roster to use. However, EA rosters do leave a bit to be desired, usually to do with players being too low or too high of an overall according to your own personal beliefs, but at the same time, there's also a lot of players that are not included within the franchise mode itself, within the roster itself, and then wouldn't be in your franchise mode, because players that are in leagues that EA doesn't have the rights to, the KHL, American colleges, stuff like that, those players are not included in the game. So what you could do, you have a couple options. You could go to Creation Zone and create the players yourself. I personally create just about every player who's a top prospect, like a first round pick or so, who's on a team in the NHL but is not in the game yet. So you might think of Cutter Gauthier, top pick for the Philadelphia Flyers. You might think about Michkov, who's also on the Philadelphia Flyers. You might think about Leonard on the Washington Capitals. You might think about Rutger McGroarty on the Winnipeg Jets. There's a lot of players who are not in the game, and by not having them there, the teams are very much put at a disadvantage. Take away Cutter Gauthier and Matvei Michkov from the Flyers, and it's a very different Flyers team in 5 to 10 years. So some players are assigned to teams that are assigned to real NHL teams, and some players are left unassigned. Celebrini, Yzerman, players who will be drafted in the future, I also put them into the game. So that's through my own creation of the players. But you don't have to go and create those players by yourself. stuff, you can also download rosters in roster sharing. So you can choose an EA roster, and you can add your own created players to that EA roster, or you can download a totally separate roster that is in the community files. So click on roster sharing and click download community files. From there, you can choose which roster you want to download and make your own. And even once you download it, you can make more changes on top of it. There are some that are very popular. You can go according to a creator that you like in particular, franchise prospects, KHL, different creators that you might know more about, because honestly, just a lot of these titles don't tell you that much. So usually you go according to a creator. I have my own roster as well. I play on PlayStation 5, but I'm using the PlayStation 4 version of NHL 24. So if you're on NHL 24, you could download mine, for example, Data Franchise Rosters. But it really doesn't, there's so many different ones you could use. You could download, check it out, give it a try. If you don't like it, change it up and then do something else. Just to say, you do have options. You can go with the EA rosters. You could go with a created roster that might include some prospects that won't be in the game and or have different overall changes, or you could download one or use an EA one and then even make your own changes on top of it. To make your own changes, you would go to rosters and click on edit player. From there, you would choose a league, most likely the NHL. You would choose a team, let's say the Anaheim Ducks, let's say Trevor Zegras. You click on that player, and then you can make changes to that player before the franchise mode begins. Once the franchise mode begins, you are locked into the roster and the players that are within them. So if I want to change Trevor Zegras' player type from playmaker to sniper, or his position from center to left wing, or change some of his attributes to make his overall higher or lower, I could do that before starting the franchise mode, but once it has begun, I cannot touch it any longer. The only thing that I'll be able to change within the franchise mode itself is the X factors, adding or removing X factors. That's the one thing I can do. Overalls, player types, positions, you cannot change those once the franchise mode has begun, so be sure to get that done and make sure you're using that roster before you get started. Also, while I'm touching upon the ability to edit players and edit a player's potential, I just want to quickly tell you about potential and player growth. That could be a whole nother video. It's a frustrating thing for many people. Potential goes all the way from the high end, which is franchise, to the low end, which would be like AHL, other forward potential. If you're dealing with NHL players, usually the worst potential you'll see is bottom six forward or top six defense, maybe seventh defenseman. But a player's potential is tied to what they could become if their growth is well fostered. To foster a player's growth, you want to play them in the role that they have. If it says they're a first line forward, you're playing them on the first line, you're giving them ice time, and they're having high offensive output. If they're 26 years of age or younger, you'll see that their potential is low, medium, or high for whatever it is. As you can see, some players have different things here: medium elite, high top 6, medium top 9. That's usually more related to the speed at which growth will happen rather than the likelihood of it happening. So Mason McTavish, with a couple of really good seasons as a top 6 forward, would likely become a fully fledged top 6 forward, 86, 87, 88 overall. Meanwhile, Trevor Zegras, if you give him the same thing with his medium elite potential, he could grow up to 90, 91, 92 overall. It's not necessarily their limit though. Keep that in mind. Like McTavish, if he were to have crazy seasons, his top 6 potential would become elite potential. Elite potential could become franchise potential. So it could change over time, but for older players who are 27 years of age or older, potential is tied to regression. So if I look at the Ducks here, I see Fowler, I see Killorn. They have different potentials. They could be low, they could be high, it could be medium, whatever. It does not matter. When you start your franchise mode, their potential will say exact. So Fowler has exact elite potential. Killorn has exact top 9 potential. But it's not what they are, what they will become. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with regression. So if a player has elite potential, it's not that they will become elite or even that they are elite. It's just that they will regress more slowly. So Cam Fowler, as an 85 overall with elite potential, will maintain his 85 overall status for a few more seasons before he regresses. Meanwhile, Alex Killorn, who's an 84 overall with high top 9 potential, he will see regression more quickly. He could be an 83 or an 82 more quickly than the speed at which Cam Fowler would regress to an 84 or an 83. So keep that in mind. Like, for example, if I look at the Chicago Blackhawks, I know one example right there is like Corey Perry. He has high elite potential. That's not because he's a high elite player, but rather because he's 38 years of age. So to keep him from regressing to like a 77 overall within one season, high elite potential will keep him as an 81 or an 80 for year number 1, and then by year number 2, year number 3, if he hasn't retired yet, then he will regress more into the 70s. So instead of him regressing right away, the high elite potential keeps it a little bit higher. So when you're playing with a player's potential and editing them before your franchise mode begins, keep that in mind. 26 years of age or younger, it's more what that player can grow into, best case scenario. 27 years of age or older, it's more maintaining the overall that has already been established. So if you were to make rosters and you go back and look at your active roster, again by clicking on roster, then active roster, you would see that the EA roster on the left is no longer checked with a check mark, but rather custom roster, which I just did right now. Now November 18th, it says for me, custom roster 5, that would be the roster that I begin with. So make sure there's a check mark next to it, and when you're satisfied, you can go start your franchise mode. Go ahead and click on franchise mode, and you'll click on new to start a new save file. Once you click on that, you will be brought to this screen, and you have 3 options. You can have an authentic franchise mode, a custom league franchise mode, or a 33rd team expansion draft franchise mode. So authentic is the most common. I'll show you that in a moment. Custom league is the newest one, relatively speaking, so I'll go ahead and click on custom league first. When you click on custom league, it could still be a normal NHL with just a couple tweaks, or you could really change it up. You can make it like an original 6. You can change the number of teams, bring it all the way down to 6 teams. You can go crazy and bring it all the way up to 48 teams. You can make a little, a couple tweaks, or you can really go all out. So you can change the number of teams, conferences, divisions. You can turn the salary cap on or off, which is normal. Inflation being on or off, which is interesting as well. Salary cap scaling, so that'll scale it according to what you make the maximum and the minimum for what players can make. But that's for you to decide. I do find that it's quite wonky. Like the salary cap max jumps from 83 to 125 million, but the minimum jumps only like 6 million, from 61.7 to 67.5. So the range of players, of the salary that players make, it gets pretty crazy when you get into deeper years. Player salary max goes from 16.7 to 20.875, and player salary minimum, by the time you're in the year 25, you're getting players who are on their entry-level deals making 2 million per season. So you can play with that if you'd like. I usually just keep it with all the normal settings because it's going to be frustrating either way as soon as you get 15, 20 years in. So that's the NHL league setup. You can also touch upon the schedule. Do you want to have a round robin? Do you want to have 82 games or more? You can go up to 84 or have as little as 20. How many times do teams play against each other within the division, conference, or interconference games? You can play with the standings. You can say how many points for a win. You can go up to 4 points for a win. Overtime win, shootout win, OT loss, shootout loss, or just regulation loss. You can play around with the point totals. The playoff qualification as well. You can have reseeding. You can have a wild card round. How many teams make it? How many teams are in the wild card? What are the tiebreakers? 4 different tiebreakers. Within the postseason, do you want to go home, home, away, away, home, away, home in a 7-game series? Do you want a home, home, away, 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 home, home? So that is the different, for round of 16, quarterfinal, semifinal. For the final itself, you can have different permutations for those. And then the same things for the AHL setup. From there, you would advance. You'd start up your dynasty. You'd put a name. You choose a team. You could realign the divisions. That would be stuff that is very self-explanatory. I won't show you that here. But those are all the different custom league things that you can decide if you choose that option. If you choose the 33-team expansion draft, you have Vegas as team 31, you have Seattle as team 32, you will be team 33. You can use default rosters or custom rosters. So you'll likely want to click custom here, as I believe default is not just like EA default, but like start of the game default, which means September 2023. So I'd prefer to always put custom on that if I were you. And then once you get started, you can select a team that you've already created in Creation Zone, where I showed earlier where you can create a player, you can also create a team. I made a team for a franchise mode series on my channel. I'm doing an expansion mode series with the San Francisco Starfleet. So you can choose a team that you've already made, or within this mode itself, you can choose to create the team right here, right now, by saying create the 33rd NHL team, and it'll bring you through all those steps. the arena, the name, the jerseys, the helmets, the mascot, all kinds of things that you can go through. So those are your two choices. You can use a team that you've already created in the creation zone, which is outside of franchise mode, and then import it in, or you can create it right here, right now. It's up to you. If you were to spend the time creating all of this and then you click continue, there's a couple of things you'll want to know about doing an expansion mode draft. So if I go ahead and just put a test name, for example, whatever, I choose my expansion team. What was it called? The Burnaby Aces? Is that what they were? Good old Burnaby 33. Yeah, the Burnaby NHL 33. I choose them. Do you want to customize your AHL team? That's also an option. Let's say I just press continue. The NHL is aligned. Okay, good. I can do some realignment. And then I make all my settings, blah, blah, blah. What you'll just want to make a special note of is the add contract year. When you go into franchise mode and any other mode, all these things are present except for add contract year and expansion draft exemption. If you're doing a 33rd NHL team, you'll only see those settings here. So add contract year will essentially do just that. Every player who's on an expiring deal will now have 2 years left on their deal instead of 1. That does change the players who are left up for grabs in the expansion draft. The AI GMs are more likely to leave a player unprotected if they're about to have an expiring contract. So that will raise the level of talent available to you as an expansion team. I know, for example, if I were to do this right now, if you go to Florida, you see Sam Reinhart, you see Gustav Forsling, you see Brendan Montour, they'll all be exposed. But if you add the contract year, now the AI GM is thinking, this is a player who's good and is here longer term, I'm going to keep them. So it's not that it really changes that much. I believe last time I checked, 21 out of 31 teams don't make any changes really. But for those other 10 teams, you could see some differences. So if you want to make it harder and or more realistic, add that contract year. You can also choose expansion draft exemption. Essentially, does Seattle have to give you a player, yes or no? Vegas will always have to give you a player, but you can choose whether or not Seattle has to give you a player. So those are settings. You'd click continue and you start up your mode, and then you'd follow the on-screen prompts to do your expansion draft and start it up. So now we come back to the most common setting, which is the authentic franchise mode. You are just going to take over one of the 32 teams in the NHL and take over from the beginning of the 2023-24 season. Unfortunately, you cannot take over the team from a certain point in the year or taking it over live as other games do. I believe NBA 2K allows you to do that. You will always be taking over from the beginning of the 2023-24 season. So, I'm a Canadiens fan. It's the third year in a row that I always choose the Canadiens. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Pourquoi pas? On va continuer avec les Canadiens de Montréal. Let's go ahead and choose the Canadiens. Then you're prompted to look at the division realignment. You can make changes if you would like. You can swap teams around. You see which team you have control of, the Montreal Canadiens right here. You can also substitute teams within the franchise mode, which is interesting. So if I want to be the normal NHL, but I want to say, like, let's say I'm relocating the Coyotes, but not taking over the Coyotes, I can say, okay, Coyotes sub out by clicking on square. It was prompted to me on the bottom. I'll just make sure that you see that. I always want to make sure that you see what I'm doing. On the bottom left of my screen, substitute team. I click on that. I substitute the Coyotes with another team that is in the Alumni Association. So I could put in the Coyotes Legends, for example. I could choose an alumni all-time team, or I could go to custom teams, as I just said earlier, the San Francisco Starfleet. So I could, for example, relocate Arizona to, let's say, Houston, make Houston on the side, and then go ahead and do that while not having to take over that team myself. It's not only if I take over Arizona that they relocate, I can do it while still being the Canadiens. So I'm going to keep them as the Coyotes, but just to say that is an option for me to do, as well as just doing that for multiple teams. So there's a lot of customizability, which is always a plus. So click on continue, and now you get to the main settings. Most of these settings cannot be changed after this point. So for owner mode, stuff like that, you cannot change those afterwards. So I'll go ahead and explain a little bit right now about why I keep some of these on and some of these off. For the video, I'll keep most of these settings on, but I'll explain to you what I do in my own personal franchise mode. Now, owner mode, I keep turned off. As we'll see later on when we start the franchise mode, there's a lot that you have to do that just does not matter. In previous NHLs, I'm talking like NHL 07, you used to be able to do a lot with the star system. Back in GM mode of like, I think it was NHL, was it 13? You could be able to work towards being, different levels of general manager, legendary GM, professional GM, whatever it was. It used to actually mean something. Now, in my opinion, it essentially means fixing bathrooms and making prices of food, which is not really interesting to me. On top of that, they'll say, for example, like, hey, your budget for your your scouts is X amount, let's say 1.2 million, and you want to get better scouts, you want to get better coaches, but the only way to do that is to get more money by accomplishing goals. And those goals, for example, will not be proportionate to the work that you put in. Win the Stanley Cup, get $25,000. Win 10 games in a row, get $15,000. That gets me absolutely nothing when I need hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for my staff. So I just find it more of a headache than anything. I personally turn it off. Fantasy draft, it's just on or off. If it is on, the league will be the 32 NHL teams and you'll be the team that you chose, but none of the players on that team will be there. If I choose the Canadiens, I don't get Suzuki and Caulfield. I start the fantasy draft and the entire league is put back into a pool essentially, and they are redistributed. So whoever has the first overall pick, if it's the Maple Leafs, they get McDavid. Second pick, if it's the Flames, they get Makar, however the game chooses it. So it'll be very fun. I highly recommend it, but just keep in mind, you'll only be the same team, not have the same players. Salary cap being on or off. Now, this is a big one. I'll get to cap compliance in a moment, but in my recommendation, always keep salary cap on. It's your franchise mode. If you want to turn it off and sign as many players as you want for millions and millions so that you always get them, the more power to you. Go ahead and do it. I cannot stand people who look down on others for the way in which someone plays their own offline mode that affects no one but themselves. If you want to turn it off, turn it off. I would recommend that any player who wants a somewhat realistic experience should absolutely keep it on, or else they'll be very tempted to just sign whoever they want for whatever they want, which is fine, but it might not be what you want. GM firing is only on if you have owner mode turned on. This can be pretty frustrating. You can win the cup for years and years in a row, then you don't update the bathrooms and the parking lot quick enough, and then your owner's disgusted with you. So I would turn GM firing off, even if you have owner mode turned on. But if you want to add that pressure to yourself, you can keep GM firing on if you would like. CPU trades, I always keep turned on, or else the league will, be kind of stagnant. Already the AI teams don't make enough trades, so keeping it turned on will have them make deals at the deadline and stuff like that. Still not enough throughout the year, but they'll still do something. Player morale, another big one. I always turn this off. It is so frustrating over the years that the conversations are always the same. No context is ever taken into account. For example, the one that I always go back to year after year after year, I used to keep morale on, and I had one of my top defensemen get injured one game. And of course, they were out of the lineup. And it was a major injury, so of course they were out of the lineup. Then at a certain point, they were not fully healthy, but they had a playable injury. I could have put them back in my lineup if I wanted to, with the risk of them getting re-injured. So instead of doing that, I said, okay, I'm just going to keep this player out for 1 or 2 more games so that he is fully healthy and not at risk of re-injuring himself. He was an 84 overall defenseman. Because of me keeping him out for 1 or 2 games, actually it was just 1 game. I planned for more, but it was just 1 game. He was furious. He came back to me saying that he couldn't believe that I would do this to him. He was demanding a trade, and he was down to a 79 overall. So not only could I no longer use that player, but his trade value plummeted, and I could trade him for like a 7th round pick. So it's so frustrating. You make one wrong move, the players are angry at you, all they want is ice time, and if you don't give it to them, they're going to be unhappy. The conversations are so stale, and they add up over the years. It's not for me. I would love to have a better morale system. I would turn it on if that were the case, but I've just been burned too many times, and I keep morale off because the AI isn't smart enough to take context into account. Fog of War, I also turn off, but it's not necessarily because it isn't a good system. Over the years, they have fixed it, so you can choose to have Fog of War turned on, but certain elements of it turned off. It essentially means that the attributes of NHL and AHL players are hidden, and you need to scout them to find them out. So if Fog of War is on, and I want to go acquire some depth player on another team, I might have to go and scout them before I know, are they an 82 overall? Are they an 80 overall? How much trade value is fair player to give up for that player without the game just telling me what that player's trade value is, in theory, it's a great idea, but the game only allows you to have 20 scouts. With 20 scouts, I can barely do my amateur scouting for the draft. So if I need to have 10 professional scouts who are scouting all 31 other NHL teams, and 10 amateur scouts who are scouting the WHL, the OHL, the QMJHL, Russia, Finland, Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, all of that, you're spreading yourself too thin. So because of the game limiting me to having 20 scouts, I turn Fog of War off because I want to prioritize my amateur scouting. On top of that, it's also true that, hey, if this player is an elite player, I don't need to send one of my scouts to go look at him for 2 weeks to know that he has like 90 passing. If he's one of the best passers in the league, I should be able to watch some highlights and know that. I shouldn't have to dedicate a whole scout to go do a 2-week report on that player just to know that, hey, he's elite. So I keep Fog of War turned off also in my own personal franchise modes. Head coach edits lines. This comes down to whether or not you want to be editing the lines. The head coach will do things on their own if you set it on, or lines will never change unless you touch them if it's turned off. You can also set auto owner mode turned on. I don't really see the point. Like, if you're going to play with owner mode turned on, you may as well keep auto owner turned off. I don't really see a reason to turn owner mode on if you're not going to do those things yourself, because it just becomes more screens that are popping up for no reason. You can auto accept relocation if you want to, let's say, take over the Coyotes, and then you're planning on relocating within 1 or 2 years, but the AI owner might tell you, no, we're not relocating. Turning on accept relocation will always make the owner accept your question of relocation. Auto sign free agents is another way that you can just take more pressure off yourself. If you just want to purely simulate, like I do, let's say for career simulations, I just want to do 20 years as soon as possible, and I don't want to have any control over the roster. I just want it to be simulated, and I want to look at stuff 20 years in the future. Auto sign free agents and auto staff management, you'll want to turn on. But if you want to keep doing things yourself, turn those off. Auto staff management, a lot of people ask me, where is the hire staff screen? I can't find it. That screen will only be available to you if auto staff management is turned off. If turned off, you will have the power to hire and fire your own coaches and scouts, but if turned on, you won't really have any power over at all. So a lot to say about the main settings. I took a little longer than I usually do because sometimes I'll kind of talk about this during the video itself, but I thought if you're looking at settings, this is probably the place that you'd want to hear me talk about it. That's why I took longer here. So let's go ahead and continue now. Let's say I keep these turned off and everything else turned on. Personally, when I'm playing, my settings look like this right here, but for this guide video, we'll have our settings look like this, which will allow me to show you some more things. So once you're ready, you click continue, but before clicking start career, you gotta also check rules and settings. Essentially, the 3 things that you'll want to look at are quick settings, advanced settings, and gameplay sliders. Looking at quick settings, a few things you'll want to see here would be turning injuries on or off, the length of a period if you're going into play or watch games. Fantasy draft, you can still affect it here if you didn't click on the previous screen. Authentic cap penalties, teams in the real world that have bought out contracts and the real life buyout penalties and retained salaries, do those get carried in to your franchise mode, or do you want it turned off and everyone starts at square one with the same amount of salary cap? Auto sign free agents, auto save. Franchise mode length, you can have as short as a 5-year franchise mode or as long as a 25-year franchise mode. CPU trades turned on. Difficulty for gameplay, you can go whatever you like. Draft pick ownership. So in the real world, teams that have traded for draft picks, they have the first, the seconds of other teams. Will it be authentic, or do you want classic, that every team has their own first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh round picks? Salary cap on or off. Trade difficulty, easy, medium, or hard. Personally, I always keep it on hard to make it the greatest challenge for myself, but it's not like easy means everything goes through either. Even on easy, trades can be quite difficult at times. So we'll talk about that some more later on. Waivers turned on or off. We'll explain what those are later as well. Accept relocation, Fog of War. Now, if you do play with Fog of War turned on, you can have certain things already uncovered. So for example, Fog of War is turned on, and I also have Show Overall turned on. So now, although I don't know everyone's player type or player role or potential, I know everyone's overall. So you can play around with different permutations of that. Everyone has their overall and their potential uncovered, but I don't know their individual attribute ratings and stuff like that. So you can play around with what fits your setting best. Again, I like this, but I don't do it personally because I just don't have enough scouts. If they could give me more than 20 scouts, I would do it. But if I need to have pro and amateur scouts, either my pro scouting or my amateur scouting will be lacking behind severely. Speaking of scouting, I can do auto scouting as well. I could do automatic pro scouting, but I have to do my own amateur scouting, or I could do the opposite where the amateur scouting is automatically done and I do my own pro scouting, or I can do them both automatically or neither automatically. Auto staff management, keep that turned off if you want to have the ability to hire and fire coaches and scouts. Next up, we have advanced settings. You'll want to keep some things in mind, such as whether or not you'll be notified when a player returns from injury at full health or just playable injury. I always keep it to fully healed. As I said previously, if a player has a playable injury, you can put them in your lineup, but there is a higher risk of them getting injured again, and B, the fact that they'll be playing at not 100%. Their attributes will be lower than what they were due to the injury. So I only put players back in my lineup when they're fully healed. So head coach will not edit my lines, and I'll only get a pop-up notification that my player is ready to come back to the lineup when he is fully healed. Auto-rotate goalies. Do I want my two goalies to be rotating? If I turn the rotation off, I'll always be the one deciding who starts every game. But be careful, if you forget about it and you have one goalie starting all 82 games, A, it's going to be higher injury risk, and B, your other goalie won't get ice time, which they need to develop. So always keep that turned on, in my opinion. Sim engine scoring, low, medium, or high. Essentially, if you turn sim engine scoring to low, the highest scorers in the league will be around point per game. If you turn it to medium, the highest scorers in the league will be around 100, 110 points. And if you turn it to high, the highest scorers in the league could be anywhere from 130 points plus. But that does affect your goalies. Keep that in mind. If your sim engine is on high and there's players scoring 120, 130, 140 points, you'll likely have a goalie winning the Vezina who has like a 912 save percentage. So keep that in mind. I usually keep it to medium, but sim engine shot frequency to high. That is the default setting. So you'll have players like Ovechkin taking their 300 shots per season, which they should be taking. If it's set to low, players are taking less shots, medium, some more shots, high, the most amount of shots. So high shot frequency with medium sim engine scoring is usually the go-to, but it's still not an ideal system as the goalies still struggle too much, but that's a problem for another day. You can also set draft class quality and generated prospect quality for drafts in the future. In the first few years of franchise mode, there are real prospects on real junior teams who you can draft. But players from Russia, players from the American system are generated. They are not the real prospects, as EA does not have the rights to those players. And then also the fact that after 2 or 3 years, players are just not real anymore. There's no real players after the first few years. So you decide this. Do you want a high draft class quality where you'll be able to find stronger players throughout the class? Do you want high generated prospect quality where you want maybe a franchise player to go first overall and a bunch of elites to go within the top 10? Or do you want low where the best player might only be a medium elite, 1 or 2 of those? So you can play around with it. Personally, after every season, I flip it around. I usually go in a random number generator and I get, 1 to 100. If it's 1 to 20, I'll set it to low. If it's like 20 to 80, I'll set it to medium. And it's 80 to 100, I'll set it to high. You can do it 1 to 30 and, you can play around with it. But I like changing it up so that it's not always the same cookie cutter. The top 5 players are elite and everyone else is top 6 until you get to round 2. I like to mix it up a little bit. Keep in mind that new draft classes are generated at the end of every offseason. So as the calendar switches in around the second week of September to the beginning of the preseason, that's when the draft class is generated. So if you want to change this setting, do so before the end of August. Moving on down now, playoff series length, authentic, continuous overtime, a few things that you would have changed if you wanted to do a custom league, but you can still change them here if you'd like while doing a normal league. Season overtime loss is worth 1 point, tie breaks in the standings. Do you want pop-ups when a head coach is fired? Do you want notifications when a team sends you a trade, or only stars, or never at all? Do you want to use the latest gameplay version, which I would say always? Do you want to be notified when players are put on waivers, again, or only stars? Do you you want to have morale meetings turned on or off if you're playing with morale? And do you want to have retired jerseys on or off as well? And also blockbuster trade alerts when a major player is traded who has a high overall. Do you want to be notified? If you want the least amount of pop-ups as possible, turn off most of these things. But in an average franchise mode, it's good to keep them on so that you're just aware of what's going on around the league. Last to look at in the settings here, we spent a lot of time on the settings. I know, the gameplay sliders. Different players have so many different recommendations for sliders. There are so many intricate things. You can look at the skating, the shooting, the passing, make this 45, make that 35, make that 75. I find that for the amount of work it would take to really like minutely go in and fix every single slider, ça vaut pas la peine. It's not really worth it in my opinion. The simulation is not affected enough to say that I should break my head to make little tweaks and experimentations on sliders. The only thing that I changed personally, 2 sliders. Number 1, the attribute effects. If a player's a 95 overall, I want them to be a 95 overall and not randomly have like a 40-point season out of nowhere. 8 out of 10 still leaves the possibility for randomness and fun storylines, but 5 on 10, I find that's a bit too crazy. 50% of the time, the attributes are having their main effect. No, if a player has high attributes, he should have those high attributes affect his level of play. The last slider that I look at is also the injury slider. If you are setting everything to auto and you don't really care, sure, keep that at 50 out of 100, put it to 60, even put it to 70 on 100 if you want it to be more realistic, even 80. But if you are simulating and you don't want to stop every 2 seconds to fix a little injury of a player who's out for 2 days, especially considering that editing lines takes so long, as we'll talk about later, I would recommend keeping your setting between somewhere around 10 and 20 on 100. 20 on 100, in my opinion, is still too much, but that is the max of where I'd recommend. I personally keep it usually between 12 and 15, but I think the 10 to 20 range is a good place to go. So I'll just put it to 15 on 100. It still gives a few injuries. It still has the potential for long-term injuries as well, and sometimes you'll get hit by the injury bug, but then at the same time, you might have seasons where you'll get 1 or 2 injuries. So you can play with it. You can put it up on down years. You can put it down on other years where you're getting just accosted by injuries. You can play around with it from year to year, even within the season itself, but I would not have it at the 50 on 100 default setting. Boy, so that was a lot of time on the settings. It's called the Ultimate Guide for a reason, so I hope that's been helpful for you. There's also accessibility where you can look at brightness, contrast, stuff like that, and also assisted strategies when you go into the game. Do you want to press a button that calls a timeout, press a button that shortens the bench? Little prompts will come up on the left, on the bottom right, I think sometimes, saying click this if you want to do that. So there are little things you can touch up there. But if all your settings are done, you can finally click on Start Career, and you'll get a little pop-up that says Salary Cap Warning. Are you sure you want the salary cap on? The system will now fix some teams that are non-cap compliant before continuing. So if you are using the EA rosters and you click Keep Salary Cap On, the game will adjust the salaries of players on teams that are over the salary cap. For example, because LTIR, Long-Term Injured Reserve, is not in franchise mode, the game cannot reconcile the numbers that's being thrown at it. So for example, in the Avalanche, with Gabriel Landeskog making 7 million, in the real world, he's on LTIR, but in the game, he's still on the team making a 7 million, and the Avalanche are over the salary cap. So the game will then reduce everyone's salary by a little bit to get the Avalanche under the salary cap. So Nathan MacKinnon, who's making 12.6 million, for example, will now have a contract that pays him 11.7 million. So in my opinion, that gives teams an unfair break when they would have to deal with a tight situation due to the decisions that they've made. They now get a break over the next 5, 6, 7 years because their stars who are getting paid big money are now making 900,000, 700,000 less. So to fix that, I have my own personal changes that I've outlined in a previous video. I have an article over on Puckpedia. I even have my own custom roster here on PlayStation 4 that has edited the teams to keep them salary cap compliant. So if you want to know more about that, check out that video. It's going to be in a card here in the top right corner as well. Essentially just 1 or 2 players on each team that's over the salary cap or even under the salary cap need to be changed so that those teams are not getting salary cap breaks. So all that to say, yes, keep salary cap on. That prompt will always come up no matter what, even if you are salary cap compliant. So click that and your mode will finally get started. So now here we are on the main screen, the franchise mode hub, and as you can see, there's a few options on this screen. You can sim to your next game, you can go to the calendar, you can check out your team leader in points, you can look at the standings, your franchise overview that tells you about your profit, your rating, your owner happiness level and all that, and also your quick links. So you click on this to advance one day. You can go to edit lines by clicking here instead of going to the team management tab, morale, draft class, all stuff like that. So you have your quick links and you have your overview. From this screen, you can also swap to your AHL system by clicking the options button on PlayStation, for example. You can see next to the NHL logo on the left, now it's the AHL logo. I can swap to the AHL, and on this, when I'm switched to the AHL, if I go to click on edit lines, for example, it will show me my AHL lines. During the season, if I want to quickly see who my top scorers are and what the standings are looking like in the AHL, I just got to click that button. But if I'm in the NHL, these are my main screens. I can click on the calendar, which is much faster on PlayStation 5. I'm glad to say, very happy that that is the truth. I can scroll through different months and go and look at different matchups. When you go to that team, you hover over it and you can see what that team's record is. You have the standings as well on the right, and you can always keep note of those as you're simulating through. You'll see important dates like the trade deadline with the little red box around it and the red at the bottom, all little things like that. You can also click on the options button again, swap to the AHL. Unfortunately, once you sim through a day, you're not going to be able to go and see what the score of that game was. You'll see when we get into calendar simulation later. The calendar is essentially just for information. You'll see what the score of that game was, but you won't be able to see what happened in that game. So that's essentially the calendar. There's not too much to say about it, but it's a good place if you want to get quick simulation done. You can sim through the calendar. I forgot to mention, when you're at the main screen, you can also click on the franchise overview, and that'll tell you different things according to what your settings are. If I have owner mode turned on, I can see all these things about team prestige, local popularity, national fan base, my gross, my ticket revenue, what needs to be fixed, upgraded, and maintained. We'll see that on the owner screen in a moment. But if you want to see what are my concessions at, my team store at, out of 100, green being good, orange or yellow meaning caution, red meaning poor. There's also under construction and requires action. Fan happiness, owner goals, team information. Team information is quite interesting, I have to say. I like this screen. It tells you how far out the trade deadline is, who are players that are available, who are the players on your block, how far away is the entry draft, free agency and potential free agents, re-sign phase, how many injured players do you have right now. I like this, not bad at all. Pro scouting, amateur scouting as well. So the franchise overview is not a bad place to go if you want quick information. I'll get a bit more into owner mode stuff when we go to the owner tab, but for now, let's now go to the team management tab. Now at team management, we can start looking at trading, a very important part of franchise mode. There's proposed trade, find trade, and then at the bottom also the trade block. So let's check that out. Starting off with proposed trade. Even if you're brand new to franchise mode, I'm sure you know, just in sports in general, trades happen very often. And if you want to do your own trades, there's two things you got to look at. Number one, the trade value that you are trading out and the trade value that you are acquiring. And number two, whether or not the team wants to acquire that player / give up the player that you're wanting to get from them. So, for example, let's take Kirby Dach, for example. The Anaheim Ducks want Kirby Dach. He is green. If I go to Anaheim and say a player with even trade value, maybe Mason McTavish, let's say, this is a pretty even deal in terms of trade value. But if I press propose trade, it's going to be rejected, mostly because, almost if not exclusively because, the Ducks don't want to trade McTavish. Even though the value looks very even, if not a little bit in our favor, the Ducks don't want to trade McTavish. Maybe with easy trade difficulty, but with hard trade difficulty, that will not happen. What I will need to do, if just I'm looking to make trades, would be try to acquire players who are red. That means skaters who are matching the block. So if I scroll through a lot of teams, usually you won't find players with a ton of value, but here's like Fabian Lysell, for example, on the Bruins. Lysell, they want to move Lysell, they want Kirby Dach, but now the trade value is too little on my side. I could send it, but they'll still reject it. So I would have to add a little bit more on my side to make it happen. So if it wouldn't be hard, I would just have to add a little bit more value. If I throw in Justin Barron or something, this trade would go through guaranteed if I click propose trade. So what you need to keep in mind when you're trading is that yes, there's trade value, but there's also an underlying value that a player has for a team if they do or do not want to trade that player. If If they want to acquire who you're sending, that's a bonus. If they want to trade who you're looking to acquire, that's a bonus. But if you're trying to trade a player that they don't want in exchange for a player that they don't want to give up, let's just say, for example, like a David Reinbacher, in theory they would want him, but just right now they don't want him, a Reinbacher for a Lindholm type of thing, this will never go through. If you want a trade like this to happen, you will have to be the one who gives up more trade value. Another way to increase trade value is by retaining salary. So if I want to trade Cole Caulfield to the Boston Bruins for some sacrilegious reason, whatever, just throw Charlie McAvoy in there. Even though the money works in terms of both teams and their salary cap, one way to increase trade value to make it more desirable for the Bruins would be to retain salary. So if I click triangle on PlayStation, I can retain up to 50% of Cole Caulfield's contract, and I can retain money on up to 2 contracts at a time. So I went ahead and retained 50%, and that increased his trade value, especially as an 8-year contract. To have him at 50% retained, that would be very valuable. Now, if I were to go to the Bruins, not Charlie McAvoy, but I don't know, I guess Lindholm again, and try to make this trade happen, even though I'd say the trade value is in their favor, because I retain salary, it makes it a bit more likely that it'll happen. Not a guarantee, but more likely. On the flip side, if you try to acquire a player and make that team retain salary, let's go to the Red Wings, for example. I want to get JT Compher from you, but he's making $5.1 million for the next 5 years. Even if I want you to retain not even 50%, say 25%, $1.25 million, and I'm going to give you someone with even trade value, Kirby Dach, and Kirby Dach for JT Compher at $1.25 million retained. They want to move Compher, but it won't go through. On the surface, we like this trade. If I don't retain any salary, they will do this trade. But because I asked them to retain salary, they won't do it. Now, granted, I'm asking them to retain 25% on a 5-year contract, but just to say, when it comes to retaining salary in franchise mode on NHL 24 and even previous NHLs, it is almost impossible to get a team to retain salary. 500K? Nope. Even if I go all the way down to, let's say, is it crazy if I just say 25K? 25K? Still rejected. So they would do this trade at no retention. But if I say retain $25,000 for 5 years, a total of $125,000, they will not do the trade. So if you want to have a team retain salary, you need, once again, to give up way more value. I'd have to give like Kirby Dach and a third or a second to make Detroit just retain a fraction of a percent. So you retaining salary is very valuable, but having the other team retain salary is very hard to do. Even if they want to trade that player, the more term that player has, the harder it will be. But even for $25,000 sometimes in a deal that makes perfect sense, the game will just not do it. So that's very frustrating. Actually, before I exit, a couple more things I want to show you. You can also trade draft picks, and you can see that their value is pretty fair. The first round pick has a lot more than a second round pick, so feel free to use those as you see fit. You can trade picks up to 5 years away, so you can go up to the 2029 draft. You have your first all the way to your 7th round pick if your team is fully stocked. And finally, when you're making a trade and you're looking through teams in the NHL, there's a few things to look at on the right side of the screen. The status, first and foremost, at the bottom. If a team is a seller, they're more likely to be looking for picks, to be looking for young players, stuff like that. If a team is a buyer, like the Bruins here, they'd be more looking at, roster players and things that can help them right now. And they're also more likely to be trading out prospects. So if you want to keep things realistic, I always limit myself. I try not to trade for prospects from sellers or conservative sellers, and I try not to trade for like good top 6 forwards, let's say, from a team that's a buyer. That's one way you can also keep things realistic in your franchise. You can look at the number of contracts they have. If you need to trade 2 players, you'll need to find a team that has 48 out of 50 contracts or less, as 49 or 50 on 50 wouldn't be able to acquire them. And you also look at quickly what some of the pieces they have on the block. They could have like a dozen or close to 24 pieces on the block, but they can just see the top 3 on the side right there, just scrolling through quickly. And of course, you can also see their salary cap, how much money they have available. If you need to trade out a lot of money, you can see which teams are even in play and what is their current record. If you only want to look at teams that are realistically looking at, let's say they'd be sellers or buyers, even if their status isn't realistic, if they're at the bottom of the league and they're listed as buyers, well, you can use your logic and say, no, they should actually be sellers. So that's the proposed trade screen. That's when you're making your own trade. If you just want an idea of a trade, you can also look at fine find trade. And by the way, you see Lane Hudson on the team. He's not actually on the Canadiens in-game. It's because I'm using my custom roster, so don't get confused. So let's say I do want to trade Kirby Dach. We've been looking at him a few times. I can click on Kirby Dach when on the find trade screen. I can click two things. I can click L1, as you can see at the bottom, to find a trade on the open block, or just triangle to find a trade. If I click triangle to find a trade, it will try to find me trades according to what my trade block desires are. And I'll show you the trade block in a moment. So it gives me only three options. A couple seconds from the Hurricanes, a second and a third from the Blue Jackets, or a second and a third in Adin Hill from Vegas. But if I go on the open block, which means I'm open to taking whatever teams would give me, now I have 15 trades available to me. So I always go on the open block. A few more possibilities are open to me. Even if I didn't say I wanted a top four defenseman, now I'm seeing the offers that include a top four defenseman. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you every possible trade that could happen, as even then, it'll only give you players that teams want to trade out. I won't be offered a trade of a player that has no highlight on their name. It'll always be a player and or a pick that a team has highlighted in red as someone or something that they want to move out. So that's if you want to find a trade. Usually if you put too much value, it becomes impossible. So I only do that for like average trades. If I want to make a big splash, oftentimes just teams don't have that much value on their trade blocks, so it just won't happen. Even if it's a trade that would go through, it's not a trade that will be offered to you because high value players are not usually on the trade block. Speaking of the trade block, if I scroll down on the trade and improve screen and click on the trade block, I can edit my own wants and assets that are on the block. Cayden Primeau, Armia, and some picks here are on the block. I can add and remove them, do what I want. I can also say, what is my surplus? I want to move out thirds and fourth round picks. And what are my wants? Do I want first, seconds, and thirds and all picks? Do I want defensemen? Do I want forwards? Do I want certain age or certain potentials of those different things? I can, and even look, I took Cayden Primeau off the block, the trade block, and now his morale went up. I don't know how he would know that, but there you go. So I can change those things, and this will affect the types of trades that are offered to me. They won't get much better, but they will affect the types of trades that are offered to me. So you can go ahead and change your own trade block as well as browse the trade blocks of other teams. I personally never go to this screen. I'll just go to the proposed trade screen and scroll through the teams and see who's highlighted in red, as opposed to seeing like 3 or 4 players at a time having to scroll sideways. Plus, at the same time, it only shows me the top 5 assets on the trade block, when some teams, like I said, could have a dozen or close to 2 dozen assets when it comes to all their picks, all their prospects that they have available. Or look at what are their surpluses, what are their wants, and what draft picks do they currently want or have future wants for. So I'd much rather look at it through the proposed trade screen as opposed to looking at the browse trade block screen, which I find just isn't very useful. So after everything to do with trading, we can now look at the coaching staff. If you have everything set to manual and you are in charge of your coaching staff, you'll have the power to promote, to demote, and to fire according to whatever you want. So when I go to the coaching staff screen here, I'll see my generated coaching staff that I am given to start the franchise mode. If you're lucky, you'll get an A-rated coach, which is great. Sometimes you might get a B-rated coach. You want to have at least an A- coach, in my opinion. Even if that coach has a perfect fit, if I look at their team fit, this guy is 66%. Even if they have a good fit, you want a coach that is at least A- rated in terms of his overall. A-, A+, that's what you're looking for. And it will impact your team performance. So having a high overall coach is important. And if you don't have one, getting one sooner rather than later in your franchise mode would be helpful. So then you have your associate coach, your assistant coach, your goalie coach, and the same thing in the AHL. In terms of your coaching staff, you need to always have a head coach and an associate coach in both the NHL and the AHL. If you don't, the game will automatically hire one for you. But for the assistant coach and the goalie coach, you could leave those empty if you so choose. What do the associate and assistant and goalie coaches do? Honestly, it's hard to say exactly, but it seems to be, in my experience and from anecdotal evidence from other franchise mode players, that having coaches in those roles who have high teaching attributes and high coach influence attributes will add to the overall development of your players and the maintenance of your players overall as they get older, just to keep everybody playing as well as they can be playing. Now, when it comes to the coach's teaching specialty, it is exactly that. Teaching specialty. be careful. Don't be tempted to think, oh, I have a forwards coach. Oh, I'm getting scored on too often. That's why my coach is a forwards coach. Or the opposite. Oh, my coach is a defense coach. That's why we're not scoring enough goals. That is not the case. This is the coach's teaching specialty, which means if I have a particular prospect in my system, let's say a forward who I'm trying to develop on my team, having a forwards coach for my forward prospect will help him to develop better. Same thing for defensemen. If I have a defenseman coach and I have a very good defensive prospect who I want to develop on my team, that coach will help him to develop better. It's not his style of play, it's his teaching specialty. So for a generalist, it's good. All your players will develop on average quite well. I think that's good to have. A forward coach will give more preference to the development of a forward. Same for defensemen, same for goalies. If I look at the coach themselves and I look at what is their style, all the way on the right next to their overall, I see style is balanced, style is offensive, style is physical, style is defensive. That's where you can look a bit more into why is my team performing a certain way. But even then, the style isn't the end all be all. Really, it's what their offensive and defensive attributes are. So this head coach here is balanced, but even if he was offense or defense, it doesn't matter. A plus offense, A plus defense, it doesn't get better than that. So I don't care if this coach's style is offensive or defensive, we will still have good offense and good defense because they're both rated at A plus. Plus, he's a generalist coach. This is like the best case scenario. A generalist coach who has a balanced style and A plus for both offense and defense. Yeah, this is absolutely the best case scenario. And even under teaching specialty, you can see it. Teaching specialty of generalists will help develop and grow all players on your team, grow forwards on your team, grow goalies on your team, grow defensemen on your team, and whether or not those types of players can go up or down in potential. So don't be fooled by the teaching specialty. It's very different from the style. And even then, really what matters most are the attributes. Beyond that, if you want to look at what that coach's team fit is, that's also very important. A bad team fit isn't the end of the world, as chemistry can still be good with X factors, as we'll get into later. But a good team fit helps to minimize the necessity of having players with X factors. If I already have a team with a good fit, I don't need to pile on the X factors to get good chemistry. Already I see Suzuki, I see Caulfield, I see Doc, I see Matheson. They're already having a very good fit in their positions, which I would assume would be first line and first D pairing respectively there. So they're already in a good spot. When looking at team fit, also keep in mind this is that player's fit in that exact spot in the lineup. So Nick Suzuki's fit right now with his coach is very good. It's a high fit, but that's as first line center, not his fit on the Montreal Canadiens with this coach. It's his fit on the first line as center with this coach. If I were to move him to a different line or put him in a different position, his fit would change. This bar next to his name would go up or down. So when looking to hire a coach and looking for a coach with a good team fit, keep in mind that that fit is with this exact lineup, with these players on these lines, not the potential of, oh, this player has a horrible fit, but that's as third line left wing. If you put him second line left wing, maybe he has a full bar perfect fit. So that's why take team fit with a bit of a grain of salt. Really what's most important is the coach's overall. So 66% team fit is great. Usually in my experience, a good team fit is something around 60% plus. If you get into the 70s, that's incredible. But 40%, 50%, you might have a hard time getting good lines and getting good chemistry if you're at that low of a fit. But it would be worth it with this type of coach. If this were my coach with A pluses and balanced and generalist, but he had like a 50% fit, I would still keep him because he has an A overall and all those other things. So team fit is a good bonus, but don't look at team fit first and foremost. Number one is what is the coach's overall. Number two, what are his attributes? Number three, what is his teaching specialty? Those are the three most important things in that order, in my opinion. And keep in mind, if you keep a coach for multiple seasons, although his preferences will never change, his overall and the accompanying attributes will improve over time. Staff chemistry is also important for team performance. 87% is really good. Oftentimes, the best teams will have staff chemistry of 70, 80% plus. If it's at 40, 50%, even if your coaches are highly rated, that could affect the performance of your team. So let's say, is there anyone who's worse down here? Not really. But let's say, for example, this D-rated goalie coach had poor morale. He's lowly rated. I'm going to go ahead and fire this coach. Louis Craig, get out of here. team morale or staff morale drops to 81%. I click on options to go hire a coach. But if auto staff management was turned on, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So make sure auto staff management is turned off. So let's say now I want to go and hire a coach. Be careful. For some reason, NHL goalie coaches are not listed. I'd have to go hire an assistant coach into a goalie coach role. So I'd find somebody I like, I'd go ahead and hire them, I'd say that they're going to be my goalie coach and send the offer. But here's the thing, I need to hire a goalie coach, but this guy wants to be an assistant coach. So if I offer him goalie coach, it could be that he says, I don't like that role. So what you need to often do is a game of musical chairs. That's why I always keep one goalie coach spot open in the AHL. I usually fire my AHL goalie coach. I don't even have usually an AHL goalie coach because I need to have one spot open for musical chairs. So what I would do now, for example, I would go out and look for a good coach, maybe even someone that's B- rated, and I would try to hire them as associate coach. I would demote my associate coach down to AHL goalie coach, hire that new coach to be my NHL associate coach, demote my assistant coach to a goalie coach or whatever, then promote the AHL goalie coach back up to NHL assistant coach. You got to just play around with it because you can't hire a position that's already filled. In the NHL, you can do that. I could, let's say for example, I want a new head coach, I can make someone an interim head coach. So if I go out and hire a head coach, that would bump this coach out and make him whatever, associate coach if that spot is open once the head coach is hired. But for some unknown reason, for years, the AHL head coach does not give you that possibility. If I try to make an AHL interim head coach, it does not allow me to do it. But if I try to leave the screen to go hire an AHL coach, they'll say, oh, you need to have an AHL coach. But I need to go and leave the screen to hire an AHL coach. And I can't hire one unless that spot is open. If I try to hire one, he'll say there's already one in his space. So again, you need to play musical chairs. You need to demote your NHL goalie coach, hire an AHL head coach to be your NHL goalie coach, then demote your AHL head coach, demote your NHL goalie coach, who's actually your AHL head coach, to AHL head coach, then promote your former AHL head coach, who was down to your AHL goalie coach, into AHL associate. Oh my goodness. Does it not make your head break? It's ridiculous what we have to do here. This has not been fixed. It's been years that this has been a problem. So I just try not to touch the AHL staff too often. I've been rambling so long, but that's the process that it is. It's a wild game of musical chairs if you want to change around some staff members. So I try to not change it too much. I usually offer my staff 8-year contracts, so I don't need to really touch it only once every 8 years. And that's about it. So those are the coaches, but there's also the scouts. If I press R1, it brings me over to the scouts in the assigned staff screen. I can also back out and go and click on assigned scouts. So I can go to coaching staff and click on R1, or I can just go directly to the scouts by clicking on the assigned scouts screen. Same thing at assigned scouts screen. I can click L1 and it brings me to the coaches. So there you have it. For the scouts, I will not say very much because I'm going to direct you to another video of mine, the complete guide to everything scouting and drafting on NHL 23, 24, even NHL 22. That's a video that I've made. It's going to be here in the top right corner in the cards. If there's ever a video that I recommend watching, it is that one. By following the method that I use for scouting, you will have at least the top 200 prospects fully scouted every draft. And part of that is making sure that you fix your scouts, and that's in that video. So I won't get into it in this video, but I'll just say, when it comes to your scouting, if you're using my settings where you don't use any pro scouts, you could fire your pro scouts right away and go hire amateur scouts. Or before doing that, you could look at if a pro scout has a good amateur scout rating. So if I go and look at where he can scout well by clicking R3 to open up his card, I see, oh, this scout also has an A rating in the USA East. So I could send him there before firing him. This scout is good, A+ in the USA West. I could send him there. So I could do that before firing him. So keep those things in mind. Before you go and fire all your pro scouts, you might want to look at which pro scout could be useful elsewhere. Once you do, let's say you fire 4 of them, you're at 17, you're down to 13 on 20. Now you have to go out and hire 7 more scouts. So you click on the options button, it brings you to the hire staff screen, and here you go. Again, that's a separate screen that you could get through directly through assigned scout, or you could go over to the manage contracts screen and click on hire staff. that brings you to the possibility of hiring coaches or the possibility of hiring scouts. I usually sort by overall and then scroll through each one looking, okay, I'm trying to see which one is good in the NLA. B, B minus, C minus. A rated, I'm gonna go ahead and hire this person. So you do that, you fill in the spots that you need. I explain in that video how many scouts you want to have in each region and then what to do for their scouting assignments. So it's a long video, but it is definitely worth it. I'll leave it there. I'm not gonna get into it in this video because it's a long process. This video is already so long. I can see it as I'm recording before I've even edited it. It's gonna be such a long video, but I'm hoping that it's helpful for you as I'm really diving in deep and describing every single element here. So that's all about the scouting and the coaching staff. Once you are scouting, if you want to go and look at the view draft class, this will give you a little bit of an idea of who's going where according to central scouting. We'll get into this when it gets to the draft later on towards the end of this guide, but you can always at any time in the year look at where players are ranked according to central scouting. You can sort by league, sort by player, and even you can sort by potential once that starts to become uncovered. The little star next to a player's name gives you an idea of the range that you're drafting in. So if you're at the bottom of the league, your star will be up here. If you're at the top of the league, your star will be around 30. So it tells you all about that. Some real players, some not. If you want to know who's real and who isn't, most Europeans are not real. In the first few years, WHL, OHL, QMJHL, the majority are real. USA West, USA Central, USA East, and Russia never have any real players. Those are always generated. So oftentimes the better gems come from there. There's no real world player who's ranked 400 in the WHL that EA decided to give elite potential to. That just hasn't happened. But there might be a generated player that has that potential. So keep that in mind when it comes to who's real and who isn't. If they don't have a picture, and if they're 17, and if they're European, chances are they could be a generated player. But feel free to give it a quick Google search if you're within the first few years of the franchise mode. But after like 2026, everybody's generated. Another thing that you can look at, which you can't see now because no one's been scouted yet, but once a player has been scouted and once the season has gone on, number one, you can see their point totals and the strength of competition of their league. For example, this is a C- league. So if a player gets 100 points in a C- league, that's very different than if a player gets like 40 points in 40 games in an A+ league. You can see their player style, their scout rank, and you'll also see more in the report on their strengths, their weaknesses, their NHL ETA, when are they going to be able to become an NHL player, how many years away are they from joining the squad. Those are things that we'll see at the draft later on. So that's the draft class. You can also look at the draft board. This is very helpful before you go into the draft because you can see where you projected to pick. If I have pick number 1 at, let's say, 17, pick number 2 from the Avalanche is 37, pick number 3 from the Wild is 94, you'll be able to have an idea of, okay, that is where the pick is. Now let me look at the scout recommendations or even go back to the draft class and scroll down to 94 or whatever and see who could be players that I'm potentially targeting. Is there a guy I really want at 88? Will I have to trade up? So keep that in mind. Checking the draft board is very valuable before the draft starts. And you also look, what are my strengths and weaknesses, my forward depth chart, my defensive depth chart, my goalie depth chart, E overall for everything, great. So good things to keep into consideration, especially when it comes to the off season. The last thing in this little trade and improve window would be the player search. Very valuable to use the player search when you're looking for something in particular, especially. If I'm looking for, okay, my team's great, but I'm really struggling, I need a top 4 defenseman. You go and look, okay, defense. Then their role. Do I want a top 2 defenseman, top 4 defenseman? Let's say I need a top 2 defenseman, and I need them to be, let's say I want a two-way defenseman who is right-handed. I need them to be, let's say, at least 25 so that I'm not getting any prospects in here. I want a guy who's good to go right now, who's going to help me today. My max on salary is I can't pay him more than, let's say, 9 million, and I want him to be signed for at least 2 years with an overall of at least 86. Let's do that. And go ahead and search, and I get 9 results. I put all my little restrictions, looking for scholarly articles, and there you go. Here are all my possibilities of sorting according to whatever you want, potential, trade value, overall, whatever it is. So there you have it. Very, very useful when you're looking for specific prospects or positions or just one sort of player to fill a hole in your lineup. This is so useful. If you also watch list any players, so for example, if I go back to here, let's say I'm really interested in Aaron Ekblad, I go ahead and pin him to my watch list. Where is my watch list? It's in player search. So I click on player search and I scroll down to watch listed. It'll give me all of my watch listed players. I can have up to 25 players watch listed at a time, and they stay on my watch list until I remove them, even if I go ahead and trade for them. So the player search, a super valuable tool and one that is very important to use. So this little window's all done. Now we can move over to manage roster. The most important thing on manage roster, and one of the most important parts of franchise mode itself, is editing your lines. Not only just making changes throughout the year, but also giving yourself the best possibility to succeed with players getting good ice time and good chemistry. So when I go ahead and enter the edit lines screen, as you saw, it asked me, do I want my assistant coach to be on or off? I keep him turned off. I can go ahead and change a few things. First and foremost, I want to have a lineup that gives me good chemistry. In the past, chemistry used to be decided exclusively due to line fit and player types. I used to put out videos, NHL 21, NHL 22, how to maximize your chemistry, but in recent history, it's become almost exclusively due to X factors. So right now, playmaker and sniper is a great combination, but with a two-way forward, this used to kill the chemistry. You could not get a +5, or it would be almost impossible to get a +5 with having a two-way forward on a line with a playmaker and a sniper. But because Caulfield has 2 check marks, and Suzuki has 3 check marks, and Pearson has 4 check marks, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have a +9 as my line score. That's not enough in the past to get a +5. What really gets me that +5 are the X factors. Suzuki has 3 and Caulfield has 3. Now you might be asking, which X factors give you the boosts? Which ones are best for your players? Honestly, I could not tell you exactly. I like to have X factors that go according to the player. Caulfield's a sniper, so he has 1T, make it snappy, and snipe. But it doesn't necessarily have to be those. If I took those 3 off and I gave him ones like for defensive stick and for face-offs and for stuff like that that don't have to do with being a sniper, he would still have the chemistry boost. So Caulfield, Suzuki, and Pearson get the +5. And honestly, because of Suzuki and Caulfield's line fit and X factors, I can put anyone on this first line with them, regardless of their line fit and regardless of their player type, and they would get a +5 with them. So keep that in mind. The X factors and the line fits for just a couple guys could be enough to negate whatever the third player's fit and X factors are or aren't. So +5 on that first line. If I want a +5 on my second line, I could do a few things like Newhook could come up here. Even though he doesn't have X factors and the player types aren't too special here with a two-way forward, I get a +1, mostly just because of the line fit. And if I were to add X factors to one or more of these players, this +1 line would become a +3 or a +5. And there you have it. So +5 on the first line and 1s throughout the rest of the lineup, because this is a good coach with good line fits. As I look at most players and their scheme fit on the right, I don't really see anyone who has a horrible fit anywhere. Most players fit quite well in this lineup. You'll often see players who fit very well on maybe 3 out of 4 lines, but one line is horrible. Like Caulfield, not a great fit on the 4th line. If I put him down there, still the +1 because of the X factors, despite the X's in his line fit. So always good to keep in mind that line fit does have its place, but it really comes down to the X factors when it comes to going from a +1 to a +5. That's why I don't really care too much about acquiring players that have a great line fit, because if the other 1 or 2 players on that line have good fits and or X factors, it negates it. So that's why I don't place as much importance on pro scouting as I used to. On defense, we see 0 +1 0. It used to be if you put any offensive defenseman with a defensive defenseman, you're set, but no longer the case always necessarily. Like no one here has the most ideal chemistry. Like I could go +2 +1 0. That's the best I could do. A lot of dashes in this lineup. So not the end of the world, but just to say with no X factors, this is pretty good chemistry. Usually you're in a lot worse of a situation. You're usually much worse off. And your goaltender's here as well. So in your lineup, one other thing you can do is, as you can see on the right side, you can click triangle for edit strategies. Now, every coach has their own strategy. Offensive line 1, how much are they going to carry and dump? How much are they going to cycle and shoot? Stuff like that. It says edit strategies, but you can't actually edit strategies. It's more like view strategies. I don't know why it says edit. You can only view. You can change the starting line. Like you could have your second line start the game if you want, but you can't actually edit the strategies. If you go into the game itself and play it or watch it, you can pause the game and go over to the lines and you can edit it in the game. But just in the franchise mode, outside of the game itself, that one game, you cannot edit any strategies, which I find pretty weird. The one place where you can make some edits would be on the special teams. On the special teams, you can't change the power play formation, but you could change the face-off formation as well, and you can't even change the anything else. Yeah, look at all the stuff you can't change. But you could change the roles. The roles are important. Who's the distributor means who's going to be doing a lot of the passing, who's the power play quarterback, who's the finisher, who's going to be the guy looking to take that shot, and the puck carrier, who's going to be looking to gain the offensive zone, and as it says at the bottom there, distribute the puck, carry the puck into the zone, dump if there isn't enough space. So usually you have your best shooter as the finisher, like Caulfield. Your distributor might be your quarterback at the point, like maybe Matheson, and your puck carrier would probably be the guy with the most size who's hardest to knock off the puck, maybe Sean Monahan on this unit. I like to make sure that you also have players on their offsides, like especially your finisher. Make sure Caulfield as a right shot is on the left side if he is going to be looking to take that shot. So that's the one thing you look on the power play. And you can also go on the penalty kill. But here you can only look at the face-off formation. You can't actually do anything else. And here as well, there's also chemistry. This is where it comes down to line fit and player types more than anything. If I just put snipers and playmakers, it might not be as beneficial for chemistry as putting two-way forwards. Monahan and Evans are both two-way forwards, which is great, but they both have X's for the line fits. If they were snipers with two X's, it would have negative chemistry. But because they're two-way forwards with two X's, it has a 0 for chemistry. So player type does have its place in special teams, but 5-on-5, not as much. So you can play around with your lines and do all kinds of stuff, but at the end of the day, you could always just press L3 and go ahead and click on head coach preferred lines, and they just do whatever they want. If you don't really care too much, you can just let them take care of the lines when there's injuries or whatever else, and they can just take care of making changes when those are necessary. You can also click on options and go down to the AHL and make the line changes there. And also keep in mind, you can do everything else here. Penalty kill, 3-on-3 penalty kill. You can go to the extra lines. You can look at shootout, the 3-on-3 overtime, extra attacker. You can be in control of all of that. A couple more things that I'll say about lines just as tips. When you're making quick changes, as you may have seen me doing, if you press square on PlayStation, you can just do quick swaps like this by pressing square on each player. You can also click R1 for quick subs for players who are scratched. I want to swap Pearson with Pizzetta. I can just make a quick swap right there. Pizzetta is now in my lineup, and now in my scratches, Pearson is scratched. Without me going and clicking on, okay, scratch this player, sorry, scratch player, are you sure? Yes. Who do I want to put in? Tanner Pearson. Do I want to substitute in the line, in all lines? There you go. So using that quick sub is valuable. Another thing I'll add in terms of my tips when it comes to the extra lines, in the shootout, what I like to do is put my shootout lineup according to shooting accuracy. So Caulfield would shoot first 91, 93 on his slap and wrist shot accuracies, as you can see on the right. Then 88, 90, 87, 87, 86, 86, 85, 86. Newhook shoots last. But if I had a player who had better shooting accuracies than 85 and 86, if I had another 87, 87 in my lineup, I would take out Newhook and put that player. As in my experience, when it comes to the shootout, it's all about the shooting accuracies. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like left to right. Caulfield, Suzuki, Doc, Monahan, Newhook for shooters 1 to 5. And finally, if I want to add or remove X factors to players on my own team or players on other teams because I want to affect line chemistry either positively or negatively, or I just want it to be more realistic, like, hey, this guy is 90 shooting, shouldn't he have an X factor? I can go ahead to the League tab and click on Edit Player, and then click on the player that I want and go ahead and scroll down to the X factors. New to NHL 24, players will gain or lose X factors over time according to their overall and attributes. So I could go in right now and give Suzuki a gold zone ability and add in a couple of extra superstar abilities. You can have a maximum of 6 with 5 superstars and 1 zone. But if I don't do that, it's also not the end of the world because the game will get it to him eventually. If he develops well, he becomes a 90 plus overall, he has super high attributes, he will develop it on his own. That's new and exclusive to NHL 24. As in previous games, no matter how good or how bad a player got, they always had their same X factor. factors. So now a player's X factors can progress or regress. Scrolling down, you can also look at view lines. You can't see the chemistry on other teams in the NHL, but you can see their lineups. This is always fun for when you're going into a postseason matchup. You want to see how your team compares to the team that you're going up against, so you can check out all of their same things that you can look, power play, penalty kill, and all of that, and you can scroll through all the teams in the NHL, or you could swap to the AHL and do the same thing for the American Hockey League. Now, roster moves. You can go ahead and click on roster moves from here, or when you're in edit lines, you can click on L3 and go directly there if you're in the middle of making line changes. You can click go to roster moves. At roster moves, here's where you can send players up or down from the NHL to the AHL. In the preseason, there are no waivers, so you can send down anyone you want, call up anyone you want, no problem. But during the actual season, you got to be very careful of this right here, waiver eligible. If a player is waiver eligible, that means they cannot be sent down without every other team in the NHL getting the opportunity to claim them for free. So you would only want to send a waiver eligible player from the NHL down to the AHL during the season if you're confident that they won't be claimed. Either their contract is super expensive, like they're an 80 overall making $6 million, or they're a low overall player like 77 and you think they'll make it under the radar. But if a player is like a normal average player, a guy making 2, 3, 4, 5 million, and he's like a mid 80 overall guy, the chances of him getting claimed are very high. So be very careful with that. You'll want to set your lineup before the waivers kick in at the beginning of the season. So do that in the preseason. So for example, Caulfield is not waiver eligible yet. It's not because he has a one-way contract. It has to do with the service time in the National Hockey League. So if he's not waiver eligible yet, I can call him up or send him down whenever I want, no matter what. But also be careful, if morale is turned on, that will affect their morale either positively or negatively for being called up or sent down respectively. Additionally, there are restrictions from the salary cap and the roster size. I can have 21 skaters, 2 goalies. I can't go over the salary cap. If I want to choose multiple players, multi-select would be clicking square. So select, see, just a bunch of guys who don't have waivers, 1, 2, 3. I could send down Caulfield, Gooley, and Harris, and then call up, let's say, Lindstrom, Armia, and Farrell. Farrell I can send back down whenever I want, but Lindstrom and Armia would have to go through waivers. Lindstrom would likely get claimed, while Armia likely would not. So keep that in mind. Very helpful, especially when you have injuries going on. Roster moves are somewhere that you will often be. To keep yourself from having to make too many roster moves and risk waivers too often, it's good to keep players up in the NHL who are just healthy scratches, who you're not using. If you need 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, and 1 goalie, it's not a bad idea to have an extra 13th forward, an extra 7th D, and even an extra 3rd goalie. But you could do it differently. You could have a couple defensemen and 1 forward, a couple forwards and 1 defenseman, no goalie. Play it how you like, but just keep in mind, having healthy scratches, even though they won't get ice time, it's a good idea to have them available so that you're not always doing call-ups and having to fix your AHL lines and who's on waivers and whatnot. It's a good idea to just have people ready if needed. One last thing that I want to mention for roster moves, as this was a major question that I got in the NHL 23 guide. Many people want to know, how do I call up my prospects who are in the WHL, the OHL, the QMJHL? And the answer is, you need to call them up before the beginning of the season. So Owen Beck, Machar, Mishak, all these guys in the Canadian system, I need to call them up to the NHL system before the regular season starts. Once I call those players up, they'll be with me in the NHL. But if I send them down after the start of the season, or if they didn't start the season with my team, they will be in the juniors for the entirety of that season. So if I send them down, they don't go to the AHL, they get sent back to their junior team and they cannot be recalled from their junior team. So when it comes to major prospects, like last year, people were saying, how do I get Connor Bedard into the NHL? You gotta make sure that he's on your team to start the season. If he's not, you will not be able to call him up, nor can you bring him back after sending him down. So be careful that your lineup is set how you want it to be set before starting the regular season. Next up, we can scroll down to morale. I already gave my thoughts on morale and why I don't like it that much. But if you want to check it out right here, you can see according to what players' morale is. You can sort by who's at the highest, who's at the lowest. What are they trending, up or down? Are they a leader? Are they neutral? Leaders, their effect is that having them on the team will boost team morale, and trading them away or stripping their captaincy or whatever else will hurt team morale. So locker room chemistry is at 61%. You want to see your locker room chemistry at 60, 70. That's a bit low, more like 70, 80+% in an ideal world. Over time, that will be built, but it can be destroyed so quickly that another reason why I just don't like it, as I explained earlier during the settings. If you want to hear more about what I had to say in chemistry, go back to the timestamp on settings for your franchise mode. I gave my rationale on why I do and don't like it. Speaking of morale, I think my favorite comment of all time came from the NHL 23 guide last year, as a commenter said, "How come I say the word moral so weird? What is more-al?" So, hate to break it to everybody, but moral and morale are two different words, just to keep in mind. So morale, it's a good idea, but the conversations, the meetings, they're so stale, and it can just destroy a team so quickly that I keep it off. But if you want to look at the morale screen, like just how's everybody doing, is everybody happy, unhappy, or what, that's the screen to go to. Also in Manage Roster, you have the injury report screen. If you want to check out how long a player is injured, you can't see it right now because no one's injured, but it would show you the player, it would tell you how long they're injured for, and it would also tell you how it's affecting their attributes. So if the player has, I don't know, let's say a broken wrist, and he has a playable injury, it will say, keep in mind, his wrist shot accuracy is at -10. His shot power is at -10. So that's a good thing to check out if you're going to put a player in your lineup and you want to see what are their actual attributes. Is he back with 88 shooting accuracy? No, it's actually 78. So another reason why I never use a player for a playable injury. I always wait until they're fully healed, but that makes them unhappy. So again, as a result, I play with morale turned off. Going down to progress reports. Progress reports are very important, more towards the end of the season. Over the course of the year, whether a player be in the NHL, the AHL, the juniors, Europe, or what, they will be playing games and they will be hopefully growing in their attributes. So in the NHL, you can sort by modifications and you can look at, okay, they're deking, their hand-eye, whatever, natural growth, statistical growth, and morale growth. Morale growth is temporary. They're very happy because of what's going on and they're boosted up, but if they become unhappy and during the offseason when things go back to normal, it'll come back down to earth. The difference between natural growth and statistical growth, I'm going to be honest, in my experience is a bit of a mystery. Natural growth seems to be growth that happens due to just the course of life. He has high potential, he's getting older, he's getting ice time, therefore his skills are naturally growing. Statistical growth seems to be a bonus that comes from if they're doing exceptionally well. If they're doing something incredible like going over point per game, that's not just going to be growth because they're happy or growth because they're learning more, but also because they are having such good success. So it's kind of hard to navigate which one's which one sticks, which one's permanent, what's not, and temporary. But what I care about most is what a player's overall is to start a season. If a player ends with a lot of growth, but then they start the season lower, it doesn't really help me as much. So when I look at a player's overall, it's really at the beginning of a season. That tells me what their base overall is. And personally, just another reason to keep morale turned off. But beyond the NHL, you can also go and look at in the system. So you can see players who are playing in Europe, players who are in the AHL, who's growing, who's not, what's their overall, what's their age, what's their potential. Always good to keep all of that in mind as the GM. Players who are not growing enough, when's the time to cut them loose, players who are having really crazy growth. So it's good to check progress reports just to keep note on, are there any crazy players that are growing in my blind spot that I haven't given attention to? Just to quickly make sure that I'm not missing out on any potential players being in my lineup or being higher than they should be. Lastly, we have the captains and jerseys. Now be very careful with your captaincies because let's say you start your franchise mode and you like Suzuki, you like Matheson, but you want Gallagher to get traded, let's say. So you take away his captaincy and you give it to Cole Caulfield, his alternate captaincy. That will make chemistry for that player and possibly even for players who like Gallagher to drop. So even though the season hasn't even started and you've never even made these decisions yet, just because the game gave it to those players and you want to change it to someone else, they will now lose morale. They'll be more upset. They'll maybe even have a conversation with you about why did you strip that captaincy from me. So another reason why I don't like morale, but just to say, be careful if you have morale turned on when it comes to changing captaincies because it will have an effect on the morale of those players and possibly the players who are highly connected to those players. So now we move on to the Manage Contracts tab. And the most important thing here would be View Contracts. I'm looking at the View Contracts screen throughout the year, just to keep account of my team, just to see where I'm going in the future. It's a very helpful place. So when you look at View Contracts, you'll see all of your current contracts as of this season, but you can also look into the future and what players' expiring status will be once their contract is up. Sean Monahan is on an expiring deal, and next year he will be an unrestricted free agent. He also does want an extension, which is good to keep in mind. If I scroll down, I would see some players are restricted free agents, RFAs, and some players don't want an extension. So it's good to have all that information in mind. I'll break down the difference between UFA and RFA in just a moment. But just to say, it gives you the contract value of each player. I like being able to see my cap space, my buyout penalties, how many contracts I have, how much retained salary I have. And of course, also, I like to use this screen as a way of counting at the start of the year or at the start of the offseason to say, where do I need to pick up some players in free agency or in the offseason? So if I count my forwards, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I might say, I don't like having so many low 80, mid 80 guys. Maybe I'll trade one of these or two of these guys who are 81 and get someone who's an 83 or an 84. It's good just to put everything into perspective. Then on defense, you can go and count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't like having 79s, blah, 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 etc. So it's a good place to be able to see your entire team in one place. Your NHL squad as well as your in the system players. So good to keep all of that in mind. That's when you're looking at the main roster. Then the same for goalies as well. Now I can also sort by, as I said, in the system. That shows AHL and then any other European or junior league. And I can also sort by all expiring. All expiring shows me any player who is on the last year of their contract. And if they did not just sign it, I could offer them an extension. If they did just sign, like Weidman or Lindstrom or Ylönen or Anderson, I have to wait until December 1st to be able to offer them an extension. But these players, like let's say Sean Monahan, he is eligible to be extended today. So if I click on him and say offer contract extension, it'll tell me at the top there, above the salary offered, extension dollars remaining, 19.37 million. That's not how much money I have today, but how much money I'll have in extension dollars, meaning moving into the future starting next season. So if I offer him different years, he wants different demands. He's an older, not old, but he's an older player who won't grow. Like this is who he is. He'll pretty much stay as an 83 overall. So whether I go to 8 years or to 1 year, his demand does not change very much, but I can try to offer him different contracts depending on how long I want him to be on the team. Now, keep in mind, for a player who does want an extension, a trick that will work about 99.9% of the time is offering them 85% of what they want. So if Sean Monahan wants 3 years at 2.825 million, 85% of that is 2.40125 million. So not 2.4. 2.4 would not be accepted. 2.40125. So that means if I offer him 2.425 or more, he will very, very, very likely accept my contract offer. Now, if he does not want an extension, like let's say Tanner Pearson, for example, he wants 2 years at 2.3 million. So 85% would be 1.955 million. It is still very likely that he would accept 85%, but because he does not want an extension, the likelihood of him not taking 85% is higher. Add in the fact that morale is turned on and it's even a bit more difficult. So the 85% trick for contract demands, for contract extensions of players on your team will work more often than not. But if they do want an extension and they're happy, it will work 99.9% of the time. If they don't want an extension, there is a risk that they won't take it. It's possible, but it's still pretty likely that they still will. Morale being turned on does play with the odds a little bit, but the 85% trick is still pretty tried and true. That's all expiring. If I look at my expiring, well, not to see right now because it's not the offseason, but in the offseason, I can have the difference between UFAs and RFAs. Now, unrestricted free agents, keep this in mind, very important during your contract negotiations. An unrestricted free agent, if you do not sign that player, by time the offseason begins on July 1st, that player will be released to free agency. As a free agent, they can sign with any team, and you could get them back, but you no longer have any of their rights. If the player is a restricted free agent, which I believe is decided exclusively according to their playtime in the NHL, if they're a restricted free agent, you can qualify that player. Now, when it comes to the difference between an unrestricted free agent and a restricted free agent, it's hard to see right now, so I won't get into it, but during the off season, I will show you that. So use that timestamp. If you want to know more about the difference between UFAs and RFAs, I will get to that later on. There's also unsigned players. If you want to sign an unsigned player, that means one of the prospects that you've drafted who's not yet under contract with your team, but you own their rights. If you go ahead and sign them, you'll see that it has to be a 3-year contract. You can play around with how much you pay them. You can't go too much lower, but just to say, an entry-level contract has to be 3 years in length. So keep that in mind as well. They're unsigned. You can look at signed recently, who wants an extension, but UFAs and RFAs will get during the offseason towards the end of the guide. So outside of contract negotiations, if we exit back out from the view contracts, we can look at free agency. At the beginning of your franchise mode, there won't be that much to see. There is like Patrick Kane, a few other serviceable players like Josh Bailey, Alex Edler, but the best time to look at free agency would be at the start of the offseason, which is July 1st. On July 1st, you'll see every player who teams released or that they just couldn't afford anymore, and you'll see very high caliber levels of players at the very top. They'll be wanting a lot of money. You'll have to be competing with other teams who are going to be interested. Again, we'll get into it towards the end of this guide during the off-season segment, but just to say this is free agency. It shows you how many other teams are interested in that player, how many years does that player want, what are they asking for, their overall, their age, etc., etc., etc. Here you can sort by the position as well as whether they are affordable. Like let's say you have $2 million to spend. You can look at players who are only asking for $2 million or less. You can look at two-way players who would be willing to take a two-way deal, which means that player would likely be in your AHL system and they wouldn't be counting the same as a one-way player against your salary cap. Signed recently, accepted offers, who you've approached, who are the RFAs, who are the UFAs. You can check that out here in free agency. Again, we'll touch upon it a little bit more during the off-season timestamp part. Hire staff, we already looked at that. You can access hire staff through this tab. Pending free agents is a good idea to look at, usually during June, or if you want to maybe look at who's a player that I could try to trade for their rights for during the draft because they'll have less trade value. These are the pending free agents for the upcoming free agency class. So right now it's September of 2023. As of now, if these players don't get signed, this would be the free agent class of the 2024 offseason starting on July 1st. I can look at RFAs, UFAs, I can look at this year, 2 years away, or even 3 years away, which is very interesting. And of course, sorting by player position. So in the end, many of these players will not actually be free agents. But if you look just before free agency, we're talking like at the end of June or right before the draft, around June 20th, it's a good time to take a look and see who is still unsigned and who could I maybe try and acquire via a trade at the draft so that I don't need to compete in free agency with other teams who are going to be trying to sign them. If you do sign a restricted free agent, I'll get into this later. Again, as I mentioned, here is the RFA offer sheet compensation. So essentially, if you sign a player who is a restricted free agent and not an unrestricted free agent, it will cost you draft picks according to how much the contract you signed them for. But we'll get into that some more later on. Now let's continue going on to the next tab, which is the owner tab. I already spoke about the ownership settings and how I don't like it that much, but let's look a little bit over here. If you do have owner mode turned on, keep in mind the owner willingness to move, of course, is low, but the owner happiness is amazing, which is very good. That will keep you from getting fired. That's what you want to always be looking at. So your owner goals, you'll see, for example, they want, Jeff Molson is saying, I want 75% of the expected profit of 80 million. I want you to build a parking lot. I want you to upgrade the team store. I want you to get more club seats. And for each goal that you do, which takes weeks and hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, even if I did every single one of these goals, what would I get over here? I would get 50, 40, 90, 130, $160,000. That gets me like one scout. Like, it's nothing. It's not worth my time, honestly. So those are the owner goals. You can propose relocation, but I'm not going to do that right now. So that's what you click if you want to actually say, hey, let's relocate. So those are the owner goals. To meet those owner goals, I can go to upgrade and start looking at, okay, concessions are at 81. Owner goal says to update the team store. So thank you, little banner says owner goal requirement. Parking lot 2, he says to go and purchase. Club seats, we're already at 99. But as always, those bathrooms are always atrocious. They always start terrible. For some reason, they're just always atrocious. So it's going to cost me $320,000 to do this. So it's crazy. It's going to cost me $320,000 just for the bathrooms. But if I do everything the owner asks through the whole season, I'm not even going to get $200,000 back. So it's, again, not worth my time. So you can go ahead and repair it. You have $2.633 million. I'd rather use that money for my scouts and for my coaches and not have to do these random things that don't really have any impact on my team's success or my player morale or whatever else. So those are things that they can be fun. I don't look down on anyone who likes to have that going. Just when I'm trying to do simulation and trades and lines, I find this gets in the way unnecessarily. You can go ahead and set prices as well for the upper bowl, the lower bowl. It will affect your profits. But again, on a team that's so successful as the Canadiens, does it really matter if they're making a few less dollars? Is he really going to fire you? I don't know, maybe he will. But game tickets, parking, merchandise, concessions, you can change all the prices on all these things. Fan feedback, are they happy, are they not happy? How much have you sold over the last few games? Nice to see, it's fun, it's immersive, but what are the stakes? The question, the main question, all comes back to the main question. Why am I doing this? Does it give me anything? It's just giving me a few $1,000s, which doesn't really get me anywhere. Team rankings for revenue generated, I can see for game tickets, concessions, merchandise, parking. Am I amongst the top teams generating revenue in these different areas over the last 7 days, 30 days, year to date, or all time? All time as in when you start your franchise mode. So always interesting, just, again, comes down to why am I doing it. Then we also have the budget, the marketing budget, the income statement, operations budget, promotions. So the marketing budget, general advertising, I can move it around with that slider. I can say, let's go less on general advertising. Let's go more on game ticket advertising. You can play around with that season ticket advertising, all different things that you can do for the budget. Income statement tells you a little bit about how much has been spent and how much is in revenue. So what is your year-to-date profit? Operations budget. Do I need to allocate more to arena operations, promotions, like scout salaries? Even if I put it to the max, I have my max at, let's see, 4.185 million. Even if I move, I'd have to move everything to minimum, which would make people upset. And the owner would say, I'm not reaching the goals, but I'd have at least the best scouts. But then it gets fired, even though I'm drafting gems and building an elite dynasty. I'd be forsaking the advertising and the promotions. So yeah, I've said it enough. You get the point I'm trying to make. And finally, promotions. These are fun because if you go in-game, you can set promotions. So if I set this game as a promotion night, it's Nick Suzuki bobblehead night. When I go into that game, I'll see a Nick Suzuki bobblehead. It's fun. It's nice to do that. So setting the promotions can be fun, and you can auto-assign them or you can do them yourself at the beginning of the season. Those are all the different ownership-related things you can do if you have owner mode turned on. From here, we can now go to the League tab. At the League tab, you have the activity feed, where during the season, you'll have messages rolling, little pieces of information about players who scored a lot of points or trades that happened. You have the edit player spot here, where you can add or remove X factors, as we saw earlier. You can also go to your settings and change some of the things, whatever, turning injuries on or off or playing with the sliders. You can save your file. But of course, one of the major things to look at here would be the record book. In the record book, you can go to any team in the NHL. Let's say we're going to the Montreal Canadiens, and you can look at career records, single season records, rookie records, or single game records. Always very fun to look at that. Unfortunately, it is glitched. I've noticed a lot of glitches over the last couple of years, and even in NHL 24. For example, in my Vancouver Canucks franchise, it said at one point at the end of my first season that Thatcher Demko had 100 wins, but then I went into his stats and said he had 116 wins. So the record book was missing 16 wins. So the record book has been glitched for a couple games. I think it's been fixed mostly, but there's still some mistakes that I catch. So for the most part, it's good, but it's still frustrating to find some mistakes. If you don't want to look at just single franchise records, you can also look at NHL records, games played for, and this is always gets glitched over time. You'll have goalies playing 1,500 games by the end, just a glitch there as well. But you can see goals, points, assists, wins, all that over the course of a season, over the course of a career, or just for rookie records as well. So now that all of those screens have been reviewed, I've used like 3 hours of my time. Let's get into actual simulation. If I'm simulating an average season in franchise mode, let's say I'm starting at the preseason, I'm going all the way to the end of the regular season, let's say and we'll sim the last game of the year just to show an example. I'm going all the way to the end of the season. The owner will always pop up at the beginning to say, hey, just you want to review some of the owner goals, blah, blah, blah. Here's the salary cap, budget allocation. All these things won't pop up if you have owner mode turned off. The preseason will go. Then you got some injuries going on. So morale will be going up and down for getting injured, recovering from an injury. When an injury does happen and a player is fully healed and comes back, Cole Caulfield was only injured for like 1 day, so the lines didn't have to change. But you will have the option to actually go and edit the lines manually or just hit best lines. For right now, I'm just hitting best lines, so not a big deal for me. Keep going. The preseason's over. The game will ask you in just a moment, hey, waivers are going to be in effect starting this day. Do you want to stop simming or not? So make all your final decisions, and then the actual season gets going. So Gallagher, okay, so here we go. He has a bruised arm. I can go into the lineup itself and replace Gallagher with another player. I can hit head coach replaces player, which means one player, let's say Pizzetta, will replace Gallagher. Or I can press best lines, which means the entire lineup is fixed now that Gallagher is out. So if Gallagher is a first line player, Pizzetta would come in and replace him on the first line if I hit head coach replace player. But best lines would mean the entire lineup is fixed and Pizzetta would actually be in his rightful spot, which would be more like a fourth liner. So if I hit best lines, that's fine. We'll keep on simulating. As you're simulating, morale is going up and down because of performances and ice time. And then, of course, eventually, Brendan Gallagher comes back from his injury. So if I say, okay, I want Gallagher back in the lineup, and I want Pizzetta to come out of the lineup. So if I go to Pizzetta, and I click on Gallagher, I click on him right here, I say yes, he's replaced, and I can go ahead and put him back. If I had hit head coach replaces player, and I said replace in all lines, a common glitch is that it will not actually replace in all lines. So if Gallagher was on the first unit power play, and Pizzetta replaced him on the first unit power play, and now I came to the lineup and said Gallagher replaces Pizzetta, it would only replace Pizzetta in the 5-on-5 lineup and not on the power play lines. I'd have to manually go to power play and put Gallagher back on the power play. I'm not going to wait for that exact example to happen where one of those players gets injured, but just trust me, that is a common glitch and it's a very frustrating one. And now here's an example of a coach conversation. Here you go. The coach wants to have a conversation about a concern. We need a veteran presence on the team. Do we really? With this team being a rebuilder and young, we need more of a veteran presence in the locker room. So essentially you can agree, disagree, or persuade. If you agree, it means, all right, let's do something. He's going to say go out and trade for one. If you disagree, see, that doesn't make sense. I'm the GM. If I disagree with you, it can't be that there's always this huge punishment to me because of morale. So it's a -15 if I disagree. Or I can flip a coin and try 50-50 to persuade. So essentially never disagree. If you don't agree, then try to persuade with a 50-50. And if it works, that's great. If not, there's that -15 that happens. So let's say I agree, just to see what the continuation of this conversation would be. We need to either sign or trade for a veteran over 30. So I need to persuade again, and 50-50, or I need to promise. Promise gives a +2, which is nice. So it's either -15 or a +2. If I say no, I don't want to trade my draft picks, I get -15. But if I say yes, I'm going to go and spend value to make you happy, I only get a +2. So I find that crazy. But you also need to fulfill that promise within a certain amount of time. I believe it's about 2 weeks. I think he says, yeah, I'll check back you'll check back with me. You'll check back with me. In 2 weeks, you won't have a job, Jalen, so pump the brakes. Anyways, let's keep on going. Trade offers will pop up over the season. You can edit the offer, you can accept it, decline it, or decline and then go and edit your trade block. Those will pop up throughout the season. Coach conversation, he's happy that you kept your promise. Even though you didn't completely satisfy my concern, I'm willing to live with the moves you've made for the time being. Thanks for understanding. I didn't even do anything. So, come on. No morale change! It's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. If owner modes turn on, as you'll see later in the season ticket drive starts up. The season ticket drive is about to begin. We have processed the season ticket renewals, below is the breakdown by section. 80% sold, pretty much 80% sold everywhere. So you can set ticket prices or keep current ticket prices. So that's something that happens usually in season ticket advertising, blah, 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 marketing. That happens around the first week of March as you close in on the trade deadline. As you get to the trade deadline itself, now there is the trade deadline minigame. In this minigame, you have the choice to set your status headed into it. Seller, conservative buyer, or buyer. You can also just keep your current trade block and not touch it at all. If I say that Canadians are sellers, they're below 500 right now, I can then enter the trade deadline or just keep on simming. If I do enter the trade deadline, I will see different players who are available, the major players around the league, Uyghur, Stevenson, Shen, Kuzmenko, look at all these guys. Those are the major players. I can see other teams that are interested in them, what's their trade value, what's that team looking for in terms of a return. Like I can see Duclair, return, top defenseman prospect. If I sort here, I can see his stats as well. As well, I can see the stats of the league going across the screen at the bottom. I can then propose a trade, find a trade, look through the blocks, look at the draft board, look at the stats, or even look at the trade summary of the day so far. It starts at 6 a.m. and it goes to 12 p.m. So you have 6 hours. As you can see, it's going about a minute every, 5 seconds or so, 4 or 5 seconds. So it gives, go ahead and do the math on how much time that actually gives you. But you have until 12 p.m. to go ahead and make some trades if you're interested. You can sort by all teams, the top 10 players who have been sold. Barry and Novak are already gone already. So if you are interested in making a deal, go ahead and make it quick. Personally, I never go into the trade deadline game. What I'll do is the day before the trade deadline, I'll look through all the trade blocks and actually find who I'm interested in acquiring. So if I come to the trade deadline and I wanted to get somebody, there's no chance of him getting traded to another team before I could pull the trigger. So you can stay here until 12 o'clock until it ends, or you can try to make trades until then. Same as before, you go to propose trade. You can look through trade blocks on the other teams. Trade blocks will be different now than what they were at the beginning of the season. Some players you'll know about, some players you won't, especially if Fog of War is turned off. Some sellers will have all kinds of players, like here in Arizona, you see the Bruins, would have prospects because they're buyers. Sellers will have more roster players. So there you go. That's a trade deadline mini game. I don't often do it because I'd rather get my player before the trade deadline. But if you want that added pressure and like the thrill of it being the trade deadline day, that's always fun. Then as you exit the trade deadline minigame, you'll see some trade alerts often for big deals that happened. What I often do is I stop simulating and then I go check it out in the activity feed. Also keep in mind at the trade deadline that trade values will be different. A team's first round pick at the beginning of the year versus at the trade deadline will be very different, as now you know the status of that team. They're very likely to miss the playoffs, or they're very likely not to be a lottery team. Even player trade value might be different, as a player on expiring deals having a very good season. There will always be a difference in trade value from the beginning of the season versus towards the trade deadline. Now, at the trade deadline, it's pretty much the only time that the AI makes trades. If you try to scroll for, this is it. You can't scroll further back. The first trade this season by the AI teams was made on March 9th here at the deadline. So pretty much the AI will never trade outside of the trade deadline. Then on the deadline, on deadline day, tons of trades will happen, but outside of that, nothing really happens. So if you have a trade that you want to make, trying to do it before deadline day, one day before, is your best bet. So now the trade deadline has passed. We're not a winning team. Let's go ahead and sim to the end of the season. So here we are at the end of the season now. The Canadiens actually ended up having a good winning record. As you can see, when you look back in the calendar, you can see the score of the game, but you can't actually click on anything that happened. You can't go and look at the box score. You can't see what the results were. Once you pass that game, it's over. So if I go into a game itself, I can either play the game or sim the game. Oftentimes in franchise mode, we're simulating the game. So if I simulate the game, I can increase the speed of simulation in the bottom right corner by clicking on the triangle. I can press X to sim the whole period. I can click square to pause. So if I sim the whole period, 3-0 after the first period, then after the second period, it's 5-0. Great. I can press circle to finish the entire game, or I can just let it run, stop at different moments. If I want to hop into the game for whatever reason, I press the options button, and I can hop in at that time. But if I don't want to do that, I'll just keep on going. I'll let it simulate, as it doesn't look like much is happening here in that game, and the Canadiens will Blues 6-0, great way to end the season. I can go in and look at the stats for this game. The box score, who played what ice time, plus minuses, all of this. That's great. But once you advance, it's over. You will never be able to access this information ever again, which I find ridiculous. So once you press continue, it's done. The season is now over. You simulate a few more days to actually end the season, so everyone plays their 82nd game. It'll tell you, hold on, one more day, and we'll see, there you go. The NHL regular season has ended. So if you want to back out at this time, you can go and look at standings, your points, and all that other good stuff. At the end of the season, it's always good to evaluate how your team did in the deeper stats as well, power play, penalty kill, and of course, over the course of the season as well. So if it were my team in a simulation, I'd go and look and say, okay, where did we finish? Actually, we were better than I passed the Canadiens. Here we go. 19th in the NHL, decent record, better than the Blues who finished 20th and made the postseason. We were scoring 3.09, we were allowing 3.26, so defense was our biggest issue as we were allowing more than we were scoring. Our power play was at 16.4%, which doesn't look high enough to be competitive. And our penalty kill is at 83.2%, which isn't bad, closer to the top than the bottom, but still kind of mid-ish. So good things to consider moving forward, but better to consider during the actual season so you can make changes while you're still in the postseason hunt. You can see your home record, away record, last 10 games, all that good stuff available for you at any time in the team statistics. You can also go and look at player statistics. What did your players do over the course of this season? Goals, assists, points. You can look at most stats, special teams, time on the ice, face-off percentages, giveaways, takeaways, all that good stuff here for your team, for your AHL team, for different positions, or you can look at other teams as well as the entire NHL. So Kaprizov with medium scoring and high shooting, as we see Kaprizov 109 points, led the NHL, McDavid 108 points, Jack Hughes 108. If you want them to get more, you got to go to high scoring. But if you go to high scoring, you'll see the best goalies in the league. Let's see, we've minimum 40 games played, sorting by save percentage. The Vezina will likely go to Stuart Skinner with a 922 save percentage. If you increase scoring so that McDavid and Hughes and everyone's scoring 130, 140, the Vezina will likely be going to a guy like Carter Hart here with a 911 save percentage and 3.11 goals against average. So it is extremely difficult to find a good middle ground. And I find like keeping it like this is okay because it's all the point totals are relative, right? You can look at rookie skaters, you can look at rookie goalies, and exclusively in season stats, nowhere else. You can't look at it in career stats, nothing. Only in season stats. You can also look at the number of fights. Keep that in mind. If you want to see Ryan Reaves 27 fights, this is where you can see them. If you go into individual stats, for example, if I click on Ryan Reaves and go into his stats, they don't show you fights for some reason. So if you want to see about fights, you can only see it in season player stats. So now that the season is over and the Canadiens did not make the postseason, what you can do is sim to the draft, because that's it now. You'll go ahead and click on playoffs. It'll simulate all the way to the end of the postseason. And the next screen you'll see will be owner stuff and who won the Stanley Cup. And there you have it. Playoffs are complete. Edmonton won the Cup. Calder Cup goes to the Charlotte Checkers. And it'll tell you about the new information for next season's salary cap. It jumped by like $6 million. So I find that's a bit much for a one-season jump. So salary cap goes up. It'll tell you the draft lottery results as well. No changes this year, which is very rare. Usually there's at least one or two changes. So draft lottery results. Those draft lottery results, by the way, are predetermined from the beginning of the season. Not who will win, but what position will win. It is predetermined that the fourth spot will jump to number 1, for example, at the beginning of the year. So if you're trying to win the draft lottery and you keep exiting out the day before the lottery, nothing will change because it's already been predetermined for which spot will win the lottery from the start of the year. So owner goals at the end of the year, the team store needs to be a little nicer. Failed. Don't make a habit of this or there will be consequences. Okay, thank you very much. Central scouting, one last time if you want to look at the draft class. And then you'll also be able to look at retired players. Retired players over the year, any players who retired either in free agency or with your team, with other teams in the NHL, if they had NHL affiliations or not, sorting by position and by team. Then you can look at coach retirement as well as retired players who can now be hired as scouts or coaches. So we see Brian Little, Stephen Comfort, and Eric Stahl can now be hired as scouts. Very interesting. And now you can also look at draft interviews. This can be very valuable. No matter what draft strategy you use for scouting, it's very valuable to use interviews. For example, these top guys, we know nothing about them. I find that so crazy on auto scouting that we know nothing about these guys. I can conduct interviews with up to 3 players. In those interviews, in terms of important information, I can essentially figure out what the player's strengths and weaknesses are, what his player type is, and how far away he is from making the NHL. So if I say interview player, it's such a long song and dance for nothing. Personality doesn't mean much. Even with morale turned on, I'd rather know more about the player's potential when it comes to the draft. I don't want to draft a good personality guy who has AHL potential. So if I ask this player about his skills, Cole Eiserman, of course, we know this is going to be a highly touted prospect. So if I say, what are your strengths? He'll tell me. If I say, what are your weaknesses? He'll tell me. And then the last thing that I'll want to look at is what is either your player type or your NHL ETA. I actually say that play style and NHL ETA is more important than strengths and weaknesses. So I say do those 2 first and then do strengths or weaknesses depending on which one you care about more. So here I can click on playstyle or readiness. Let's go ahead and click on playstyle just for fun, and he'll tell me, let's say looks like he's a sniper. My shot is my best asset. So thank you. I have up to 3 questions with up to 3 players. I know Cole Eiserman, because he's the first overall pick, is likely NHL ready, so I don't need to use a question on that. I found out that he's a sniper, and I found out that he has shooting and defense as his strength and weakness respectively. So Eiserman, now I see his player type. If I go into his scouting report, I can see, very good. Even though I don't know much about his attributes or his potential or whatever else, I see A+ shooting. Even though it's only 2 bars scouted, you see the little binocular left next to the word that says shooting. 4 bars means fully scouted. 3 bars means a pretty good idea. 2 bars means so-so, and 1 bar means pretty much a guess. So A+ shooting with 2 bars is okay, but for a first overall guy, I know that it's very likely to be more accurate. So it's good to know, at least I know that. So what I'm trying to say is interviews are good for players that you know nothing about, that your scouts didn't cover maybe, or maybe if you did scout that player, there's just one last thing you want to know about. Like this guy, if I say Berkeley Catton, 3 bars out of 4 two-way forward, I might go to the interview just to really make sure he's a two-way forward, because it could be possible he's actually something else. So aside from that, I scroll and I see a lot of players are not scouted very well by the auto scouting. That's why I do my own scouting, but I could do up to 2 more interviews. Pro scout calls, blah, blah, blah. And now here we are at the draft. As I said earlier, something that you want to do at the end of the season is go to your progress reports to see what kind of development your players had over the season. So if I sort by attributes modified, I'll see Cole Caulfield. I'll see lots of natural growth. That's exactly what I want to see. Very good. And if I look in the system, I see, Machar, he was like a 67, I think. That was a 76. Florian Xhekaj's up to a 64, 23 modifiers there. There's the progress reports. I see a big difference. It's good to keep track of who's going where. It helps me to have a better idea of who I'm going after in free agency and whatnot. Now I can go into the draft itself. I won't spend too much time here, but at the draft, you can make trades. You can trade for players just as normal trades, or you can look at players who have expiring contracts. That's always a good little plus, a nice little trick. If a player has an expiring deal, his trade value will be much lower, especially if they're about to be a UFA. So for example, William Nylander, he still has some trade value, not absolutely no trade value, but he still has some trade value, which is far less than what it was during the actual season. So William Nylander could be someone that you acquire not for nothing, but for way cheaper than he would have been, just to acquire his rights to have the first chance at giving him an extension before he goes to unrestricted free agency and every team in the league is trying to get him for an increased amount. If you have the chance to sign him, it's possible that he wants to sign and you can get him for the 85% trick. So keep that in mind when you're at the draft. If you're not trading, you can go ahead and sim to your pick. You can sim 1 pick at a time, or you can go ahead and sim to your pick, the entire draft, or just 1 round at a time. Sim to pick number 13. As you can see, a lot of players with Fog of War on and all that, you can't see their overalls or their potentials. When it's your pick, you can take a 5-minute timeout if you're not sure what you're doing, or you can go ahead and make your pick. Of course, it would be according to who has the highest potential, who is your scout recommending. You could look who is the closest to making the NHL, because if a player is NHL ready, according to their NHL ETA, like let's say the difference between these 2 players, Maxime Massé, it says he's 3 years away. That means his overall is somewhere in the 60 overall range. If they are NHL ready, that means they're likely about 77 overall or higher. Usually that range is about 77 to 84 overall if they're NHL ready. If it says 1 year away, they're somewhere in the 70s, 2 or 3 years away in the 60s, 4 or 5 years away, usually in the 50s or high 40s for the overall. But if you don't know anything, you gotta take a guess. So if I take Jarome Iginla's son, welcome to Montreal, buddy, he's still unknown. I need to scout my own player before I can know more about him. Just a bunch of question marks everywhere. But he is drafted, he is in my system, bada bing, bada boom. So at any time, I can look at the message center, the draft board, draft summary, blah, 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 or just say, Sim's my next pick now. As the draft is going on, I can look at who I'm targeting. Okay, I'm at 62, but the next guy I want is at 85. So I'll trade down from 62 to 80 and then gain an extra pick there. So it's all about how you want to strategize. And that's about it for the draft. So when I'm all done, I've said I've made all my picks. I can go to sim options and just say sim entire draft. That'll take me all the way to the end. I'll get a quick little recap on who I drafted. There are all the players I drafted. I can go by teams. I can go by round. It's very nice to be able to get a little recap if I want to go back and see guys who I wanted, where did they go. So just keep note of that possibility as well. And once the draft is over, you can then simulate one more day. As you can see on the calendar here, I'm 1 day after the draft and 1 day before the re-sign phase. So I need to advance one more day. Now I'll have scouts who are expiring, so I can go to the assign scouts screen and re-sign those scouts by pressing X, you see in the bottom left corner, re-sign scout, which is very easy if owner mode is turned off, because another big thing about owner mode being turned off is that the budget does not really come into play. Even though the budget will be there, I can go over it and it doesn't matter. So it's essentially like there's no budget with the owner mode being turned off. So I can offer him whatever, 8 years at a max money if I want, but I don't need to. If the scout's already on my team, usually he'll re-sign for whatever I'm offering. So that's how you re-sign the scouts. You can also, it'll show you, okay, RFAs are coming up, blah, 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 and now you go to the re-sign phase. At the re-sign phase, you now have to decide between those UFAs and those RFAs. The UFAs, you need to sign before July 1st or you will not be able to keep them. Because once July 1st hits, other teams will be trying to sign them. However, if you have a restricted free agent, an RFA, you have two options. Option number one would be to, as anybody else, try and offer a contract. What's also interesting is you can see their expiry status right above the salary offered, expiry status. If I offer Lindstrom a 1-year contract, at the end of next year, he will still be an RFA. If I offer him a 2-year or more contract, he will then become a UFA once his contract is over if I don't re-sign him. So keep that in mind. My other option is to qualify. If I qualify Gustav Lindstrom, it will cost at least 1.045 million, but at least I'm guaranteed to keep Gustav Lindstrom at that price if he signs the qualifying offer. If Lindstrom decides to not sign the qualifying offer and he goes to free agency on July 1st before having signed a contract with me, he can still sign with another team, but then I am eligible for compensation. As we saw before on the offer sheet compensation, if another team signs one of your RFAs, or if you sign another team's RFA, it's the exact same as signing a free agent, but because they were qualified by their team, you owe compensation according to how much the player costs. So Gustav Lindstrom, he could get signed by another team for free. You got to be careful. Your cheaper players will be able to get signed for free. You will have the option of matching whatever another team signs your player for, so it's not a big deal. But keep in mind that if it's under 1.415 million, it will be free. That's in 2024, though. I think that changed a bit from what it was in 2023. But just to say, if it's cheap enough, they won't have to offer compensation if you don't match it. So make sure you have money available, because if you need to match it and you don't have the money available, they will be able to get your player for free. So be careful. The game will warn you that another team has signed your player for this amount and the compensation is this. You have up to 6 days to get your affairs in order, free up the cap space, and get the available money to match the offer. If you cannot match the offer, or you choose not to match the offer, that player will go to the new team that signed them, and you will get the appropriate compensation if there is any. So as you can see, it goes from a 3rd round pick all the way to 4 years in a row of 1st round picks if you're signing a big star at over 10.725 million. So back to the contract screen now. I can go ahead and take care of all my expiring players, my UFAs, my RFAs. I can qualify my RFAs and take care of them later. I can also qualify them and hope that if nobody signs them, that over time their demand will come down. That's another trick. If I qualify a player, let's say Justin Barron wants 1.5 million, but I only have 1 million, I can qualify him now for 1.015, and then let's say a couple of weeks into the offseason, he's getting nervous, he wants a contract, his demand will come down, and I can sign him for what I can afford. So qualifying is good to get a player's demand to go down, and it's also good if you're not so sure about, will I have the money, will I not? I'll decide later. The UFAs are the ones you need to decide on before July 1st, or else they will go into the free agent pool. So let's say I took care of all that stuff. I'm ready to sim to free agency now. I would sim to July 1st. Let's go ahead and do that. End of re-sign phase, blah, blah, blah. The guy's warning me, of course. I didn't renew a bunch of the scouts. Jordan Harris is upset because Sean Monahan didn't re-sign. Sean Monahan was a leader, so many players are upset that he did not re-sign with the team. Keep that in mind if you have morale turned on. Contract limit warning, blah, blah, blah. Now free agency begins. In free agency, I have two choices. I can sort by the UFAs. Let's say I'm sorting by overall. I can go after UFAs and sign them for free. I only need to pay them. I have close to $25 million to spend, so I could sign most of these players. If I want Steven Stamkos, he wants 1 year at $8.175 million. I could look at different offers. He wants 3 years at $7.9. Keep in mind that in free agency, you're often fighting against other teams, so you'll likely want to overpay. If I want Jake Gensel and he wants 4 years at $9.075 million, guaranteed the Penguins or the Sharks are likely offering him at least 9.2, 9.4. If I want to really make sure that I get Gensel, I'd offer him likely 9.75. If I just want to be competitive and if he comes to my team, that's great. If he doesn't, I move on with my life. I give him 9.25. I give him 9.3, maybe even 9.5. That would likely get him, but it depends on how you want to play it. Do you really want to make sure you get him, or do you want to pay what he's asking and hope that he decides to sign with you? Because he will decide based on some things, such as players on the team who he has high morale connections with. Let's say if I'm the Penguins and he used to be on the Penguins, he's going to have a lot of buddies in Pittsburgh. Or you might look at, is your team a contender? Is it a rebuilder? Do they have a lot of good wingers already? Would you not fit into the lineup? The AI player logic will look at that when deciding on which team to sign with. I can also sort by RFAs. So if I want to look at the RFAs who are available, any of these players who I want to sign would require me to give some sort of compensation. Be careful. Like Alex Formenton, I think he's like an 82 overall, but the game is telling me he's 87. That's because my pro scouts haven't scouted him enough. But the best way to know if a player is actually there overall is to look at the money. Philip Hronik is actually 86, 87 overall for sure. Meanwhile, Formenton asking for $2.4 million, there's no way he's an 87 overall. So be careful. If you go and sign a player, if you send them an offer and they're an RFA, the game will warn you. Okay, if he signs with you and Vancouver does not match the contract, you will have to give them a first, a second, and a third. Do you want to confirm? Yes or no? And keep in mind that the draft picks needed for compensation must always come from your team. So even if you have, for example, a first, a second, and a third, but those first and second are from you, and then your third is from another team, you would need to go out and reacquire your third round pick, let's say, from whichever team you traded it to originally, so as to be allowed to do the offer sheet. Finally, one other thing that I didn't touch upon is that at the end of any given season, you may go in to check out the awards. If you were in the postseason, you can check out the playoff tree. You can see what happened. I mean, even if you weren't in the postseason, you could check it out. But this is the playoff tree. The Capitals made the final. All right, good for them. You can check out the postseason team stats, the postseason player stats, as well as the all-important awards. Who won the Stanley Cup, the President's Trophy, all the team awards, then all of the individual awards. You can do this in the NHL as well as over in the AHL. By just clicking on that little options button to switch between the two. And personally, when I'm doing my own franchise mode, I like to have an Excel sheet or something like that so I can keep track of the awards that are won, as yes, keeps track of the last 5 winners, but after that, they are lost to history. And from there, that just about does, ladies and gentlemen. What you can do is advance a few days, take care of the off season, wait for for contract offers that you sent out to get answered, and eventually you can hit sim to next season. Over the course of the off season, you can change your generated draft class, as I said earlier on. You can look for any gems that may be unsigned in free agency, players who are sticking around for too long and their demands are going further and further down. And there you go. So all right, I'll end it off here, ladies and gentlemen. What a video this year. They keep getting longer every year. It used to be more of an an overview. Now, this was like a true guide and a true walkthrough for every facet of franchise mode, so I really hope that it was helpful for you. If you came to this video with a question, I hope that it was answered. If not, please do leave a comment down here on YouTube or go over to the Discord server, link in the description. And that just about does it, ladies and gentlemen. In such a long video, I'll keep the outro short and sweet. Whichever way you choose to play franchise mode, that is the way that gives you joy. That's the way that gives you fun. All the more power to you. I hope that this video has helped you to have a better understanding of how to do that, whether it be a 6-team league with owner mode on, or a 48-team league with no salary cap and you're just going wild. Whatever it is, we love franchise mode, and that's why this community is so great, and it would be that much greater with you as a part of it. Join in to be able to add your tips to other players who could use them. Join the community to join in on our franchise mode series on the channel right now. We're doing an expansion series, we're doing a Canucks series, we're doing different types of simulations like career simulations, breaking news and analysis in the real world of hockey. It's a blaster in the channel, and we'd love to have you join. So if this video was helpful, please do leave a like. It's always a huge process to make, but I always look forward to doing it. Looking forward to seeing you again in NHL 25, where hopefully more will change. But for now, this is the mode we have, and we make the best of it. So thank you once again for taking the time to enjoy the video. I hope that it helped. I look forward to hearing from you, and I wish you all the best in your franchise mode experience.